Good everything. Good everything. You got to unmute. Yes, that's okay. Whew.
I was just,
Yeah.
like you fight responding to Jimmy Baldwin. So you know how that is.
Simple-minded.
Simple
He,
mind.
he he faked me out because I was like, oh, simplicity. Okay, that's good. And then he said, minded. I
Yes.
said, okay, he's going somewhere. He's going
Yes.
somewhere. And it's something we've been talking about. Good everything. Good everything.
Good
I feel like we've done
everything.
this 3 times now, which we have. Hi to everyone.
Hey, to everybody
Thank you for your patience.
in the world. No, thank you. We here because you have architected this. We have a global community, and it is life-giving, life-saving. The only thing is, I know you love everybody, but I know that you already couldn't show up anywhere in public, and that's just been the case without everybody mobbing you. And it's a bunch of Negroes down here in DC. Was at Sankofa last week with me and Mike Harriet. Like, we try. I said, everybody calm down. She's here in spirit. She's the.
Actually, I don't get mobbed. I feel
you don't get mobbed. People.
No. There's a it's almost like family. There's like a hey. There'll be a few people like but it's always very like family. Like when you haven't family in a while, it's like, what's up? There's a hug, but there's no mobbing. We're not celebrities. We are family members. We are teachers and family members. We're not celebrities. So it's a totally different vibe. Even when I'm like at the airport, to be somebody who's like, hey, they have on, it's like, I listened to you with Dr. Carr. It's like, yes, but it's different. I don't, which I love. We were talking about a little bit, to be able to have a community that gets what the assignment is, which is we are stronger together, that when we move as a unit, things happen. But more importantly, even when we disagree, it's centered in a respect and a love. And it's not hard. It's really not hard. It's actually pleasurable to be in these spaces with you. So
no question. The same here. I feel the same way. So both times, as I said, the first time we started, and for those on the YouTube side, if you go, we'll drop the link in the chat so you can see what we saw in Knarrative, because we got to guard this space at all times. We don't want YouTube striking for video sharing. So thank you, Prof, for making sure that we never have that. There's a small clip from a speech. Really, I guess it is a speech because it was a public oration, but it was mostly question and answer that day. December the 10th, if memory serves me correctly, 1986, that James Baldwin gave at the National Press Club here in Washington, D.C. And this is less than a year before he made transition. He made transition in December the 1st, 1987. And he's talking about what he talked about for almost all his public career, which is being black in the world, particularly black in the United States. But I heard you a couple of times like, never. What was it about? I heard you the first one, yes, the idea of simplicity, but he saw. It's funny to how a writer. Do you do that? I mean, I feel like I don't hear you do that in public discourse on the radio or anywhere else. He was editing in his head, but he was talking through it.
Every day.
Really?
About
I mean, but then he shared it with us. He was like, I don't want to go that far. I was like, wait,
you do it.
No, I definitely do it, but
absolutely do it.
You so smooth with it. Maybe I wasn't.
3 hours a day. You know how many things. You know me too, so there's so many things that I would absolutely say because I don't have a filter, but I'm also mindful there are babies in the car. I don't know who's listening. I'm not here to offend people because I can be very offensive, not on purpose, but I have a jovial. I played a dozens in my head, so I'm, we both do it. Even when you name call, it could be a lot worse.
Yeah, we do. Or it could be a lot worse.
It's a lot worse.
No question. And there are tells. There are verbal markers. 90% of the time when I say shout out, it's for an insult that's coming right after. Shout out to Byron Donaldson. But
usually when you say my friend, it's
my friend. Yes,
it's not your friend.
I use. And that's an acquired idiom because that is strictly continental African. When continental African calls you my friend, then you better duck. My friend. Oh, here we go. So yeah, I picked that up from the continental Africans over the last 40 years or so. my
Can I
friend.
just say, first of all, also, I loved how you navigated on the radio when you and Lamont were talking about the Brits. I was sitting there, I was like, oh, it's about to be fun. It was interesting. No, you're like, I'm a pan-africanist. I'm a
No question.
and for me, there's no distinction. And he couldn't quite figure out what you were saying. In the moment I was sitting there, I was like, I wonder when it's gonna click. Because what's ironic, and it's so weird, people are raised in these families, where they celebrate Kwanzaa and they go through. Yeah, and there's a very Pan-African thread in their family. It was in my home. We didn't celebrate Kwanzaa, but it was very Patrice Lumumba. I knew who Kwame Nkrumah was. I knew who these people were growing up because my father was very much, ISIS papers in my home. Like I'm reading these things. So to be Black in America and divorced from Roberta Clemente or what, like, are we doing that? No, we're not. That's so silly.
No, we're
so
not.
I loved how you were very nice.
I have to be. Yeah, Lamont's my brother, and y'all putting us together was beautiful. And I must say though, in moments, there are moments as we're together when we're in conversation, and I imagine that thankfully, Lamont is voicing what a lot of our people will voice. So therefore, we're talking with each other, but I'm also talking with all them people who think that way. So we get to have a conversation, and vice versa, because I know that even when we talked a little bit about open borders, it was an opportunity because people think, well, why would I want open borders? I say, have you really thought about this? Money doesn't have any borders. The only borders they got is you. Because when Elon Musk decides to do something, like he doesn't like the laws in Delaware, so he's moving everything to Texas. He's taking it out of California because he doesn't like their laws around sex and gender, so he's moving to Texas. They do what they want to. When you stand up, that's when they say, hold on, let me see your papers. So it was an opportunity. I know that that's a far thing, though. So it goes both ways. But yeah, that was.
But what it reminded me is that we have to, first of all, talk.
Yes.
We have to speak up. We can't suffer in silence the ignorance of other people, and because ignorance spreads like yeast and wildflowers.
Yes.
We have to stand, those of us, we have to keep talking. And there's an echo, but yeah, no, we have to keep talking. Yeah, no, that's okay.
Hold on,
that means I'm supposed to stop talking. So
no, it's good. We do have to keep talking. It's funny. I was listening to at moments when I'm trying to clear my head because I got to reset to do something else, or sometimes just because put on music, and I was listening to Thelonious Monk, rhythming. If anybody's familiar with Monk's rhythming, it's a very kind of frenetic piece, and beautifully beyond the recording there are videos of him performing it live. And Monk's thing was spacing in music, spacing in sound. So he's at that piano and his hands are always splayed across the keyboards, and he's hitting sometimes with this finger, sometimes with this, and he's going back and forth. Then he'll get up and dance when somebody else take a solo, he come back and hit it. And you're always thinking this is like a high wire act. Does he know where he's going? But he always knows where he's going. And to listen to Monk isn't just to listen to the notes he's playing on that piano, it's to listen for the silences. Because when he spaces it so incredibly, it's like he's not playing every note in his head. He's giving you enough so that you can hear where he's going. And also, if you want to go somewhere, you can put it in that space between the notes he's hitting. And I'm saying, I have to say that dialogue, that's what we do. Give it time to breathe. It was interesting, wasn't it? Because by the time we finished that session, that 3-hour session, Lamont was a Pan-Africanist too.
But he always was.
Yes. Yes.
I think that's the beauty of these conversations. It's like we can go down these rabbit holes and we can be around people and hear these things that satisfy there's a scripture that says the itchy little ears. It satisfies that, but it's not real, right? It's not really centering what you believe. Right. And what we do every Saturday, I think, is just kind of reminded me who we are, why we're here, what we're supposed to be doing. And it's a simple message. It's very simple. And it's all of us. It's not this, that, and the other. Divide and conquer. Read Sun Tzu. It doesn't end up well for us. Why are we going to do the very thing that got us put on holds of ships and shipped over the seas because we didn't see each other as one? We doing that again? How's that going to end? Oh, history. Didn't end well.
It never ends
Haitian
well.
Revolution was only able to happen because the Mende and the Timne and the Akan and the Dahomey and everybody got together and said, we whipping these people's asses and we about to be free. The Maroons, they didn't say what tribe. No, y'all created black. Okay. All right.
And shout out to the paramount chief of the Akambong who joined us this week, Richard Curry from Jamaica. The Maroons were in town. Your friend, my friend, our sister came with, man, Senyata, man. She is a Maroon now. So she had all the Jamaican Maroons, all the people from the DMV, they were all there. And Brother Curry couldn't get to the States. His flight got messed up, but he called in and he's friends with Lamont. So we had a conversation about that and he talked about that. I mean, that's a global situation we're dealing with. And, the Akapong there in Jamaica, they're like, yeah, we live on the island we call Jamaica, but this is our country, Maroon country. And we beat the British and the British had a treaty with us. And then when independence came, the Jamaican government never had the formal conversation with us to reiterate the fact that this is free space. This predates quote unquote independence. We took our independence. So their struggle continues to be, particularly as they have found lucrative minerals in the forest and water sources that feed other parishes on the island. The struggle has been now not with the Europeans, but with the African people, with the Jamaican government, who are continuing to do what many of our governments do around the world, unfortunately, which is cede these rights to these Europeans, these companies, so be very careful when you go to Jamaica for vacation and go to one of these beautiful resorts and you realize black people don't own it. And then if you're in a certain place, you'd be like, wait a minute, whose land? The Maroons said, this is your land. It's not just our land as Maroons. We are global. This is your land. And so you come down here. Oh yeah, he got into it. We might have to have him back because he started to go in on Chris Blackwell, who Peter Tosh to the day he died called Chris White Wrong, to talk about the man who is the reason that a lot of us know the name Bob Marley, but never forget it was Bob Marley and the Wailers. So if Bunny Wailer and Peter Tosh were here, they could tell you not about Bob Marley. It wasn't about Bob, but about Chris Blackwell, who's still around, who got all this land. And I got hip to who was I talking with who said it was Haile Garima. He was like, you need to watch, what was the food critic that unfortunately took his life? Anthony
Bourdain.
Bourdain, in one of his journeys, I guess it was on CNN. I went back and looked at it. It's the one called Jamaica. He goes to Jamaica and he's going into this back of yard places and then talking with the Maroons, and they hipping him to how these people encroached on the land. And he's sitting at one point with these elders who Chris Blackwell hooked him up with, but they're also telling on how, this is what they doing, man. We can't even fish in our own water anymore. See all that coastline over there? They own all that coast. And I'm saying, this is why Anthony Bourdain was so important. It ain't the food. He's using the food to get to the people. It's fascinating, man. You've said that before, but I was just like, wow. And of all people, it was Haile. He said, yeah, because he said Bunny Wailer called him. This is when they were making Sankofa years ago, and said, look, I want to tell you the real story of what happened to the Wailers. And Haile was like, I didn't know at the time that I needed to do that. And now he's an ancestor. But there's a story that's not going to be in One Love, the movie. It's not going to be and that's the story of the people. And about the people, it's about self-determination. Everybody make money off us but us. Everybody's making money off us but us. And he was talking about that. By the way, University of Alabama, all you young people thinking about you want to go play football for Alabama, you need to check out what them white boys did this week. They closed the Black Student Union. They talking, they said, well, we got a law in Alabama now, anti-DEI, so we got to close. Hey, I'm for it. Close it. And guess what? Let that Black Student Union sensibility hit that football field. Let's close that too. Since you don't want black people to have a Black Student Union, it don't need to be no black offensive and defensive line. It damn sure don't need to be no black quarterback like they got right now. You boys need to leave and take those sisters on the track and basketball team with you. Since they don't want black people at the University of Alabama, at least not to have a little corner of a little student union where they can sit somewhere and breathe. Since you don't want that, you don't want us on the football field. Y'all better get hip to this. Let's get hip to it. Anyway, Maroonage is big. And yeah, Lamont Pan-africanist.
Yeah.
So Woo, it was a busy week.
Yeah, it was. It was slow news day, as you
Yeah,
Carr does say. You know, it is a beautiful show. I just want to say that driving around as a listener. And those of you who don't have Sirius XM, get it,
please.
get it.
It's a beautiful network, man.
Yeah.
You bringing the
Oh, what happened? Your mic. People don't want you to say that. All right. Yes, we are bringing the fire.
I put it down and turned it off. Now it's back on.
All right, perfect.
Yeah.
So you know, a couple of things we were sitting in. I watched a documentary. You know, I do my what to watch list every Friday. Usually, you know, I try to mix it in on purpose. So, and these are things I've actually watched. So I always try to put a documentary in, just because I know people who are listening, they probably may not have seen certain documentaries. But there was a documentary on Piney Woods, Mississippi. I did not know that there was a boarding school in Mississippi. And as you know, the now headmaster was reading from a book from the founder, I was like, these young people, wow, but they're struggling, always trying to get money, and you know, it's hard to fund. And I was thinking as I was watching this, so many schools were self-funded, even, you know, Tuskegee, not self-funded, but money was not the obstacle to people creating institutions.
No.
And now it's all about money and grant writing, and you know, but there's a certain soul selling that goes into that our predecessors didn't have when they imagined having these schools, these safe spaces for us. So we often talk about institution building. I just wanted, before we get into Baldwin, wanted to pick your brain a little bit on how we can make that shift now. If they did it before with very few resources, what are we missing today, and why can't it be done today the way it was done before?
Well, it's interesting. I'd have to go back now to the archive so that we could figure out where we had a little bit of a conversation, and we've done so many now. We had 2, 3, 4. So, but I know it's in storage. I'm looking over to where it used to be, but now all that bookshelf is packed up. Lawrence B. Jones, the man they called the little professor of Piney Woods, he wrote a couple of books, and then there was a lady, a white woman, actually there in Mississippi, who wrote the book called The Little Professor of Piney Woods on Lawrence Jones. Lawrence Jones was, of course, the founder of Piney Woods. So, in fact, I'll tell you who attended Piney Woods boarding school for a time. Marshariki and Kamal Jawanza's son, Sabeko, went to Piney Woods because Black nationalists, they didn't want him, so they sent him to Piney Woods, and then from there to Fort Valley in HBCU. So there was a network, and Piney Woods is still there. And I see Janice in the Knubia chat saying, yes, Piney Woods Black boarding school. People, Piney Woods is almost like, if you know, you know. And in fact, there's that network, Black self-determination, is still alive. So how do we build that? Just talking with the founders of the Mount Bayou Museum, and who I was on with them, and Dr. Travis Armstrong, who's a Nubian, who's probably here this morning, who went to Kemet with us. We were in Kemet. He said, man, y'all got to come to Piney Woods. Said, yeah, we've been talking. Come to Mount Bayou. Said, yeah, we've been talking about, you know, Karen been to Mississippi. We talking about coming back. So like 2 days ago, we were on a Zoom between classes. They sent me a link, and I sat there talking with them, and they were like, look, we've got this building. 2 brothers, their father's still alive. He's 94 years old. One brother's the mayor of Mount Bayou, and they got this museum that tells the history of Mount Bayou. And they say, when y'all coming? We coming. I said, we got to get you on Sirius. I'm going to send you the stuff so you could talk to them. I said, we all going to talk to y'all, because what they said is, it's a matter now, not of human resources. It's a matter of financial resources, because people are coming through now. They're giving us stuff. I tell you who is now in conversation with him, because she, of course, played Emmett Till's mother in Till, and that's Tanya Pinkins, because
that's right. That's her roots too.
No question. Exactly.
Yeah.
They have.
Look, this is why we got to talk. Actually, I'm connecting these dots right now.
This is the thing. The dots are connected. They have materials from the movie sets of Mothers of the Movement and Till, and the Mothers of the Movement people said they would send them some of the props that they used. And then when they really got in conversation and saw what they were doing, they said, wait a minute, hold on. We're going to do you one better. They built a whole exhibit at the movie set, California, and sent it to
Wow.
them. So they have this, but now they don't have enough space. They have a building, but now they got to get a bigger building. So I guess the answer is what you just said. You gave the answer, connecting the dots. We have everything we need. The dots just had to be connected. Somebody today did not know. I see Cape Town has jumped in on the YouTube side. What's going on, y'all? Some people did not know that there was a Piney Woods. Now they want to know, oh, how can I?
So it's called Sacred Soil, the Piney Woods School Story. It's on Hulu. For those of you who want to watch it. In the beginning, Will Crossley, who is the headmaster, he reads from Lawrence P. Jones's book, chapter 12. I'm just going to read this sentence. He said, another principle to be followed is that it is fearlessness that enables us to put ideas into practice. In order to move the race forward, one must be willing to go against the majority and be content to stand alone.
One must be willing to go against the majority and be content to stand alone. And who is that majority? Depends. It could be your own people. It could be the system. They're in Mississippi, which by, if we just look demographically and culturally, should be one of the strongest places we are as African people in the country. And I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that because it depends on the barometer. If
look
we use
look at you editing in real time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. That is true. I guess, yeah, that's true. Yeah, because I had to shift it because I'm thinking about it in terms of not social structure, who we are to other people, but governance in terms of who we are to each other. Actually, in social structure too, who we are to others. Mississippi, there's a case to be made that Mississippi, right alongside, maybe even more in different moments in time, so than South Carolina, has been the most influential state in the union. In some ways, because we wouldn't be talking about, I mean, no Mississippi Freedom Democrats, no Kamala Harris. Let's be very clear about that. It doesn't matter whether people know that or not, except it absolutely does, because as Baldwin said, it is ignorance and pride in ignorance. It's considered a virtue in the United States not to know something. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. But the more you know, the more you realize, oh, it was those Mississippi people that said, you know, we could go along with the Democratic Party and continue to negotiate behind closed doors. And yes, they're going to send a segregated delegation, or we can have a primary of our own in Mississippi that is not restricted by race. Because people think of the Mississippi Freedom Democrats like it was all black people. No. It was interracial. It was anybody who wanted to vote. And then we're going to Atlantic City and we're going to tell them, look, we're going to sit in this delegation. Or let's be very clear. This party that you have, the Democratic Party, is not inclusive. But so what happened? In 64, they didn't compromise. They took their delegation. In 68, they changed the rules. And now in 2024, you got somebody running for the vice president of the United States. And if you know the rules of the Democratic Party in terms of delegate selection, not winner take all, how it's but the fact that there wasn't even an uncommitted movement to say, we've got votes, this is what we want, whether they got it or not in the complete way they did. They didn't get somebody on the stage, but they did get several speakers, including the vice president, put that language, at least much of it, in their speech. All of that's because Ms. Hamer and all of the women and men that were with her busted up in there like, we don't care what the majority thinks. So Lawrence Jones that's absolutely right. And they're all part of a network. We're going to stand our ground. We're not going to say we are against you. We're going to say this is what we're for. And then the world changed. So Mississippi in some ways is the model.
And a man that I didn't know until I started watching this documentary, Lawrence C. Jones.
Lawrence C. Jones, not P. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you think about born in 1882 from a family of educators. So you know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, so he was born in 1882 from a family of educators, you know, that started schools in Michigan. He, you know, Iowa, he graduated. He was offered to teach at Tuskegee, turned it down to go back home to teach in a small town in Utica, Mississippi, and then was inspired by Tuskegee to start the school. So you have to also, you know, pay homage to the people that are doing it, right? And we continue the legacy by continuing the legacy, not criticizing the legacy. Of course, we could criticize Booker T. Washington all day, but Booker T. definitely inspires so many of the great things that we have going now. We can parse his politics and how he was able to you know, wield white what do we call approval, but Tuskegee still stands.
That's right.
And so many
That's right. Tuskegee still stands, and you'll never You know,
Oh,
I
you're
represent.
wearing the shirt. I look at
Oh
that.
yeah, of course, of
I didn't
course.
even
In fact, when we
realize.
were there for homecoming last year, when Dr. Kelsey, when they honored him, Mariba Kelsey, 99 years old, who is the last living founder of the chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha there. So we all went down, and Reba and I were in his daughter Reba, Dr. Reba Kelsey at Morehouse School of Medicine. We were at the bookstore on Sunday after chapel. You know, I load up on Tuskegee stuff. My mama was born less than an hour from Tuskegee, and as a little girl in junior high school, she ran on that track because, you know, Tuskegee's track program was well known. My mom didn't get a chance to go to high school, as many of you all know, but she was a teacher her entire life, and that was one of her dreams, to teach. So in many ways, what I'm doing is I'm extending that dream, my mother and father. But yeah, so when I saw this one, I said, "Oh, this ain't Tuskegee. Oh, this was supposed to be the TI, Tuskegee Institute, like Hampton Institute." But this is not Samuel Chapman Armstrong who founded Hampton Institute. This is Booker Taliaferro Washington, who founded Tuskegee Institute. So I say I gotta get this shirt right here. So yeah, I'm repping the TI today. The TI. I represent not TIP, but Tuskegee Institute. The TI to me makes the most sense. But and the other one of the other reasons I love Tuskegee stuff is because in terms of human solidarity and the importance of cultural meaning making, the fifth of our 6 Africana Studies categories. This is not Oliver Otis Howard University. This is not Clinton B. Fisk University. This is not William Wilberforce University. No, it's an indigenous word. It's Native American. You understand? The African Methodist Episcopal Church, as Bishop Frank Reed and everybody else in the AME Church would tell you, you know, they named almost all of their schools for Black people. Morris Brown, Levi Coppin, or Fannie Jackson Coppin, the husband and wife there, educators, Coppin State in Baltimore. Edwin Waters in Jacksonville, Edwin Waters. Those are all AME. You know, AME schools in many ways because they name them for Black people. Wilberforce is an exception, but they talking about the abolitionists. But yeah, Laura Spelman Rockefeller. This is not Spelman College. You understand? Henry B. Morehouse, president of the American Baptist Home Mission. This is not Morehouse. It's Tuskegee. You understand? So I like the solidarity gesture between Africans and indigenous people of the hemisphere. I like that word. So Tuskegee. But yeah, I mean, and to say that Jones was inspired by Tuskegee, that he was offered, you know, to link with Tuskegee formally, as was Du Bois before he took the job at Wilberforce, is to talk about Black self-determination. And of course, those loops, those dots, as you say, continue to connect. We think about the power of Mount Bayou, Dr. T.R.M. Howard, the Knights and Daughters of Tabor, the Tabor Hospital, which is still there, the links between them and Tuskegee, and Booker Washington coming through there and saying, this is what Black people can do. The politics get tricky. And we've talked about Booker Washington on many, many occasions. If you go back through our archive, you'll see extensive conversations, complete with bibliography of books that we showed. Everything from Lewis Harlan's 2-volume biography of Booker T. Washington to something I didn't show. But again, when we get this building, it's going to be the best library we have that is strictly in this Pan-African theme and Pan-African work, which is the 14-volume Booker T. Washington papers. You have those. But there is one that I did, interestingly enough, hadn't thought about Booker T. Washington this morning to have a conversation, and we won't get too deep into it. Won't get deep into it at all. But I will show you something that that isn't in storage. I kind of keep some of these around, not only for information but for inspiration. This is the first edition, 1916 copy of the biography and accounting of accomplishments of Booker Taliaferro Washington that was written by his chief lieutenant, Emmett J. Scott, with contributions by the grandson of Harriet Beecher Stowe, Lyman Beecher Stowe. The one-time president of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, wrote the preface. And that book, here it is here. This book is called Booker T. Washington, Builder of a Civilization by Emmett Scott and Lyman Beecher Stowe, with a preface by Theodore Roosevelt, Garden City, New York, Doubleday. It's dated 1917 on the page, but if you go to the Verso page, the copyright is 1916. Booker Washington died in 1915. And Robert Russo Moton who was a graduate of Hampton. The white boys on the board picked Moten to come from Hampton to take over Tuskegee Institute, to take over Tuskegee Institute, in part because the man that should have been the principal, should have been the head of Tuskegee, was Emmett J. Scott out of Texas. Emmett J. Scott is actually, I want to say, the great granduncle. I'd have to go back and look, because I talked to her about this actually when we were out in California last year for the 10th year marking of Black Lives Matter with Dr. Melina Abdullah. Talked to Elaine Brown about this, because Elaine Brown, I think Emmett J. Scott is her granduncle, great granduncle. But at any rate, Emmett Scott should have been the leader of Tuskegee, but he couldn't be controlled the way that they thought they could control Major Moten. That's the same Robert Russell Moten who the school in Virginia, the high school in Virginia, was named for. Moten High School. That's the one Barbara Johns and her sister and them walked out of to protest segregation. Barbara Johns, of course, was the niece of the minister at not Ebenezer. What's the school? Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. Remember, Vernon Johns was the preacher at Dexter Avenue in Montgomery, a block from the Capitol, where Martin Luther King ended up taking that pulpit because they got rid of Vernon Johns because he was too revolutionary. His niece is the one who started that walkout in Virginia, in Prince Edward County, that challenged the foundations of segregation in education. And her uncle, Vernon Johns, was the pastor in Montgomery. But the school that Barbara Johns and her sister integrated, and Barbara Johns' sister was here. Talked to her remember a couple of months ago when Little Rock 9, everybody was here at the Museum for African American History and Culture. The Johns sisters' uncle was at Montgomery, and they sent Barbara up, and she's in Virginia, and the school that they walked out of was Robert Russell Moten. Robert Russell Moten was the principal at Hampton until they brought him to Tuskegee after Booker T. Washington died, and it was Robert Moten who wrote the foreword to the book they wrote about Booker T. Washington the year after he passed, in which he says, "In the passing of a character so unique is Dr. Booker T. Washington, many of us, his friends, were anxious that his biography should be written by those best qualified to do so. It is therefore a source of gratification to us, of his own race, self-determination, to have an account of Dr. Washington's career set forth in a form at once accurate and readable, such as will inspire unborn generations." That will be all of us, friends. That will be all of us. Well, maybe not all of us, because this was 1916, and saw that the oldest person in the world, at least in terms of attestation, people documenting, made transition like last week at 117. So maybe not all of us, but damn near all of us. This is who he's writing to. He said, so that such as will inspire unborn generations of Negroes and others to love and appreciate all mankind, all people, I would say, regard of whatever race or color. Dr. Moten goes on to say it is especially gratifying that this biography has been prepared by the two people in all America best fitted by antecedents and by intimate acquaintance and association with Dr. Washington to undertake it. Mr. Lyman Beecher Stowe is the grandson of Harry Beecher Stowe, whose Uncle Tom's Cabin had a very direct influence on the abolition of slavery, and Mr. Emmett J. Scott was Dr. Washington's loyal and trusted secretary for 18 years. Now, I hadn't intended to read from this book today, but I'm going to end with the tagline that he signed and the date that he wrote this forward. Robert R. Moten, Principal, Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, August the 1st, 1916. On this last day of Black August, having now framed it with the first day of August, ancestors are hilarious. They just got jokes. They be the, y'all right, keep going. Major Moten, What the Negro Thinks. We did a whole thing on that. Remember? Robert Russell Moten, What the Negro Thinks, an anthology that has everybody in it. Mary McLeod Bethune is in there. Emmett Scott is in there. What the Negro Thinks. Rayford Logan is in there. We talked about that. We have to go back in the deep days of COVID to go through that deep dive. It's all in the archive, though. We don't play. The Black University is jailbroken. We're all here together. But here on this last day of Black August, which the United Nations marks as the International Day for People of African Descent. That is what August the 31st is every year. This also marks the entering, in terms of September, October, November, December, the last 4 months, not by name in Latin, but by fact in time, with Julius and Augustus Caesar having messed up the calendar so that we are now about to enter September tomorrow with Earth, Wind, and Fire. Sept in, of course, Latin meaning 7, although it's the 9th month, because these two decided to do what Europeans often do, which is inject themselves and mess everything up in terms of how we think about time and space. But it's okay. It's not good or evil. It's just what people do, right? And it's not exclusive to Europeans, but it just seems that over the last 500 years, it's been disproportionately Europeans. But at any rate, as we go into this last 4 months, these last, I guess, trimester, this last 4 months of the year, we know that the end of December marks the end of the United Nations International Decade for people of African descent. We'll talk more about that in a minute, because that decade started in 2014. It ends in 2024, the end of this year, this calendar year. And in that decade, the UN wrote a lot of things, had a lot of events, and it's something we don't hear a whole lot about in this country. I'm gonna come back to that in a minute, but thinking about that on the morning, as if you're watching this later in the week, right now we're doing this global live stream, our 234th in a row, on the morning of a convening that we will have here in Washington, D.C. this evening at 6:30 Eastern time, which will be live streamed. If you go to the YouTube page or the website, sankofa.com, Sankofa Video and Books will be live streaming the celebration of James Baldwin that we wanted to have earlier in the month, but we were in Kemet, and so they decided to wait until the end of the month to do it. And because James Baldwin was born August 1st, 2020, August 20, centennial, August the 1st, 1924 in New York. Well, we decided to go ahead and put that on the last day of the month when we were all back. And by the way, everyone who came in person and everyone who has joined the thousands who have who watched either live stream or has watched the recording, and Sankofa has a really rich video archive, a fraction of which is on their YouTube page, which is great because now they live stream everything. But for the first maybe 15, almost 20 years of their work, they recorded things, but they didn't post them. But they have all those recordings that they're in the process of beginning to upload for public consumption, because that's what the purpose was before. After all, Haile and Shriek are filmmakers. So, I mean, there are all kind of conversations with all kind of folk. I would encourage folk to look at the live stream, not only from, if you missed it from last week, when our good brother, fellow Nubian, one of the foundational members of Knubia, and one who has supported so much of all this collective work, our brother Michael Harriet, was in town and in conversation with the family there around his book Black AF History, as we know. A week before that, which I'm bitter that I wasn't able to get to, a friend of James Baldwin was there, one of the great cultural critics. In fact, Toni Cade Bambara says she's the greatest cultural critic, the greatest interlocutor of that age, the great Eleanor Traylor, who just passed her 90th birthday a while back. Dr. Traylor was there in conversation about Augusta Savage, the sculptress. That's been recorded. All that stuff's on Sankofa's website. So everybody we got to see in person last week, thank you all. That was a beautiful, well, I'll say thank you. Let's thank each other and thank the institution Sankofa, thank the Nubians. So many Nubians were there. Thank Knubia, everybody, and thank just the general community for that rich physical convening and the virtual convening that joined it, because at this point thousands of people have watched that conversation. It was a very important conversation, and as Mike said at the time, talking about his mother, as we all know, who homeschooled them in the school she named for herself and said, it is for my children. You know, she said, I don't trust this school system to educate Black children. I do not trust them to educate children of African descent in what they need to know. You know, those institutions were around when Jimmy Baldwin was going to DeWitt Clinton High School in New York, but there weren't very many of them. So you're talking about the 1930s. But if you look, you know, they couldn't send him a generation later to Piney Woods. and he wouldn't have known to go. But Baldwin grew up in black spaces. His so-called stepfather, I say stepfather, David Baldwin, of course, was a preacher. He himself was a preacher for a couple of years as a teen. Not quite a child preacher, but not quite an adult preacher either. And then, of course, you see him emerge as a writer, emerge in the genealogy that includes Richard Wright and Chester Himes, emerge in the genealogy that includes Ralph Ellison and Gwendolyn Brooks, emerge to maturity by being captured and tickling the fancy through his book reviews and then through his essays of in the larger social structure of New York and beyond, the white press, white media. In fact, perhaps the best single volume that I'm aware of to really grapple with the question of how James Baldwin became James Baldwin that we know, chapter 10, The Peril of Something New, or The Decline of Social Realism. One of the finest writers that I know. And I'm not just saying that because he's my brother and we've been knowing each other since we were in grad school together 30 years ago. Over 30 years at this point. But my brother Lawrence Patrick Jackson, Baltimore's finest. Lawrence Jackson wrote a book called The Indignant Generation, A Narrative History of African-American Writers and Critics, 1934 to 1960. Because by 1960 now, you're going to see the emergence of Amiri Baraka. You're going to see the emergence. Oh, by the way, saw that Hetty Jones, Amiri Baraka's first wife, made transition, I think, last week. Hetty Jones is white. Hetty Jones was Leroy Jones, then Leroy Jones, his wife. Spent a lot of time in Greenwich Village, spent a lot of time in community with the writers like Allen Ginsberg and so many others that then Leroy Jones was involved with. And then after the assassination of Malcolm X, you see them split. Jones really begins to shape and locate the locus of his work. Of course, he's from Brick City, from Newark. Of course, his son Ras is the mayor now of Newark. But Baba Amiri then moves, changes his name to Amiri Baraka, Amiri Baraka, and moves up into Harlem for a base of operations, Black Arts Reparatory Theater, and eventually then back over to Newark, between New York and Newark, and then to Newark, as they might call it, and then the rest is history. But Hetty Jones continued to work over the arc of her life, and she just made transition a few days ago. So just thinking about that in the context of what we're talking about. But by 1960, you see the emergence of what becomes the Black Arts movement. His deep collaborator, compatriot, his friend out of Philadelphia, of course, the great Larry Neal, who was also great friends with Eleanor Traylor, who was on that video. If you go back and look at the conversation around Augusta Savage at Sankofa a couple of weeks ago. But anyway, Larry talks about that period before that Black Arts movement, what he calls the indignant generation, because there wasn't a lot to put in a narrative piece. And in chapter 10, he kind of talks about the rise of James Baldwin. And if you want to talk about James Baldwin, we could do that more later. I bring Baldwin up because, and by later, I mean, if you all tune into the live stream, we're going to be talking about Baldwin this evening at Sankofa. I just wanted to bring Baldwin up, and Prof. Hunter, thank you for playing that little clip of him at the National Press Club shortly before he made transition. So James Baldwin, 1924 to 1987, he made transition at age 63, a young age, relatively speaking, cancer, stomach cancer. In between his birth and his transition, I got all my Baldwin stuff. Just about all my Baldwin stuff is in storage. I had a few things here. Of his 20, I think, 2 books. This is one of them later, Just Above My Head, which is an interesting piece that he published in 1978. But, you know, his better known works, Go Tell It on the Mountain, Notes of a Native Son, that long essay, The Fire Next Time, Nobody Knows My Name, Giovanni's Room, of course, the novel Blues for Mr. Charlie. You've seen, of course, the recent movie If Beale Street Could Talk, written a bit much later. After he wrote they made a movie out of that book of If Beale Street Can Talk. But One Day When I Was Lost was the movie script that he wrote about the life of Malcolm X that never got produced. The Devil Finds Work, a small essay on Black imagery and film that the filmmaker Raoul Peck turned into his film and companion volume, I Am Not Your Negro. All this is James Baldwin grappling with human possibilities and the potential of human beings, and how that is often stunted by race. You know, early Baldwin is trying not to be a black writer. He's a writer who happens to be black. He wants to break out of that, but ultimately he has to continue to return over and over again to questions of race, because he was born in the United States. And in that short moment we showed from the National Press Club, what Baldwin says is that, you know, I'm speaking to you as the descendant of someone who was enslaved, the grandson, in fact, of an enslaved person. He says, I'm speaking to you as a product and a member of a certain democracy, so to speak, the product and issue of a certain very complex history. He says, he's telling these people at the National Press Club, among the people who get name checked at the beginning was our sister and elder, the great Dorothy Gillum, the first black woman to work for the Washington Post as a columnist. It says the product and issue of a certain very complex history, someone who represents a very complex country, which insists on being simple-minded. That's where we started the clip. A country which insists on being simple-minded. I want to read a quote from another book that I happen to not have put in storage. This is our good brother Horace Porter's book, Stealing the Fire, The Art and Protest of James Baldwin. And, you know, this is why, you know, physically we get all the books together. It's going to be great, because I don't know that there's anything written by Baldwin that was published that I don't have. But these are some of the few that were still around here. Baldwin wrote in an essay called Princes and Powers the following: one of the attributes, perhaps, of what is taken to be a healthy culture has, generally, and I suspect necessarily, a much lower level of tolerance for the maverick, the dissenter, the man who steals the fire, than have societies in which, the common ground of belief having all but vanished, each man in awful and brutal isolation is for himself to flower or to perish. Baldwin is saying, you know, what's taken to be a healthy culture has a much lower level of tolerance for the maverick, for the person who bucks, right? So, Prof, when you mentioned Lawrence Jones, the little professor of Piney Woods, who says you can't care what other people think, you got to build your institution, even if you got to go against the majority, whatever the majority is in the context that you're going in, you got to expect that in a healthy society. By the way, Baldwin has healthy in quotation marks. He's being, of course, facetious in this moment. In other words, if you go to that speech he gave at the National Press Club, the conversation he had at the National Press Club, one of the things that he says is that, you know, ignorance is the fuel of this country. People don't want to know. They consider it a virtue. In fact, during the question and answer, somebody asked him about The Color Purple. The movie had come out fairly recently at that time, in December 1985. He said, frankly, I thought it was horrible. I thought it was horrible. He said, you know, if you're going to detail the pathologies or narrate, you know, shout out to Steven Spielberg, if you're going to narrate pathology around black maleness, then you also need to narrate the rest of who black men are and have been. You need to be able to flesh that completely out. It's very interesting at that moment, because of course that movie was all the rage, and it's like, yeah, and I you know, I looked at it and went some, but I'm also looking at it through a different lens. Even when it came out, I was 20 years old, and I wrote my senior thesis at Tennessee State under the direction of the great Lawrence P. James. Oh, by the way, Dobali for ring the bell for our brother Herman Devereaux Brady, one of the great drama professors who made transition recently at Tennessee State, from Tennessee State University. He and William Dury Cox, that whole crew, those were the teachers of one Oprah Gail Winfrey, and my teachers too, all serving in the Department of Speech, Theater, and Communication under the direction of Jamie Coleman Williams. So I'm just calling those ancestors because Brady made transition, and he's, I think, the last of the great teachers of that era who shaped all of us, including Oprah Gail Winfrey. So when you hear her say Kamala, that theater, some of it comes from Kosciuszko, Mississippi, some of it comes from Milwaukee, but the shaping of it, that's Tennessee A&I State College for Negroes. Shout out to Herman Brady. But in the process, what Baldwin is doing in that moment is talking about ignorance, and he's talking about the bliss that ignorance wears, and he's talking as the grandson of a slave, the product of a member of a certain democracy, the product and issue, as he says, of a certain very complex history, someone who represents a very complex country and insists on being simple-minded, one that insists on being simple-minded. He's saying that in the context of the quote I just read to say that sometimes you got to go against the grain. And when you go against the grain, that can cause pain for you. For young James Baldwin, it meant he left the United States and went and lived in France for 9 years. Not the first time that he did that. He came back to the United States. Eventually, he would go back to France, back and forth. And eventually, when he made transition, it was in France. He went to Africa. I think, like all of us, find James Baldwin's command of English profound and moving. His focus, completely understandable. Race, even though he went beyond race and wanted to go beyond race and did in many ways, but he had to keep getting drugged back to it by a society that's ignorant, by a social structure obsessed with race. I find that focus understandable. I also find it deeply unsatisfying. I confess to a kind of ambivalence at moments about the work of James Baldwin. Didn't know Jimmy Baldwin, wished that I had the opportunity to be in his presence. I knew, and it was in the presence of a lot of his comrades, whether it be Amiri and Amina Baraka, particularly Baba Amiri, as he would travel and come down here to see their friends like Eleanor Traylor, Toni Morrison. Never got a chance to sit with Tony K. Bambara, or Larry Neal, but so many of those figures of the Black Arts Movement poured into my generation, into me and all my comrades and friends. Askia Muhammad Touré, of course, the great poet. I mean, it could go on and on, but the point I'm trying to make is not to just name people, but to say that these generations are linked directly. And they go on. While in Atlanta, when Mario Beatty and Lethea Watkins were on faculty at Morris Brown College and Clark Atlanta, respectively, they had a lock-in at Morris Brown one night, and we stayed all night in this conversation. That's back when Mulimu Baruti was Larry Crawford. Some of y'all know Baba Baruti and his wife, Larry and Linda Crawford. This was back in the days when the convening was completely physical. If you weren't there, you weren't there. Marimba Ani came down from New York. Shout out to her granddaughter, Kahinde, who was in my class now at Howard University. How fast and they wouldn't even thought about her. Her daughter, her mother was a kid. And I remember standing there with Askia Muhammad Touré, the poet, and we had bought some copies of some books that one of the vendors was selling. And one of the things that Baba Askia picked up that day was the book on Martin Delany by Dorothy Ullman, Martin Delany, father of Black nationalism. And we stand there talking about it. All these years later, Baba Askia is still around. Also Marvin X, who helped preside over the funeral rituals for Nathan Hare about a month ago in the Bay Area. Those rituals were held, by the way, and presided over at the church of and with the presiding over Reverend Dr. Amos Brown. Everybody here has probably seen Dr. Amos Brown. He gave the closing benedictory prayer at the Democratic National Convention because one of his parishioners, one of the people he counseled, one of the people who called him after she was endorsed by the President of the United States to be the President of the United States coming up, one who was called him in Bennett Church every time she can make it to the Bay Area, that of course will be Kamala Harris. Connecting the dots. Being in community, seeing beyond ourselves, our individual selves, to see the community. Baldwin, that day at the National Press Club here in DC, talked about being the product of this craziness with his typical brilliance. But as I was saying, and then I'll go on because I just want to mention this because I want to mark it. We may talk about this some more tonight. Knowing highly, I'm sure he's going to get into it. We're going to watch the film Heard It Through the Grapevine, which was James Baldwin about a generation after the 60s. In the 80s, he's traveling through the South, talking with people who participated directly in the freedom struggle, the liberation struggle in the 1960s, people like Hosea Williams and others. Then he's walking around with Africans from other places, like the great Igbo writer Chinua Achebe on the beach, having conversation about you know, what it means to be black in the 80s and how the work of the 60s and 70s fed into that, what has been achieved and what hasn't been achieved. He's in Newark with Amiri Barakan and walking around in the projects and the housing projects. So you see Baldwin with these children, these black boys and girls around, and just having this kind of listening. He's doing more listening than talking, sitting with gospel choirs as they rehearse and being in conversation. This is the film. I heard it through the grapevine. We'll be watching that and having a conversation about this. Again, this man who traveled, who went to Africa, who, you know, is having these conversations about global blackness, but he is almost exclusively anchored when he's talking about black people in blackness in the United States. Even though when you read things like Stranger in the Village and other places, the times he spent in Turkey, the times he spent in France, and his debates with William F. Buckley here, you know, you see him globally, but his globe still carries this anchoring trauma of race that he has spent his whole life writing through to try to escape and transcend. But where I kind of depart with him, and I'm not saying it was a depart, I would have loved to have been in conversation with him about this, was there is a marker. At one time, he heard the great Senegalese thinker Cheikh Anta Diop, the great Mourid, the Wolof thinker from Senegal. Cheikh Anta Diop presented on the African origin of civilization at a conference that James Baldwin attended. It's written up in Présence Africaine, the great journal edited by Alouine Diop out of Paris. Senegalese though. I'm very particular about calling people who are Africans British. That's what you and I were talking about. If you don't have Sirius, you can go back, you get the app, you can go back and listen to us having that conversation yesterday on the air on Urban View Mornings. And we're blessed to have those several days where we get to sit in the chair. Shout out to Omi and Shauna Ray and who occupy that space from 7 to 10 every morning, Monday through Friday. And it was a blessing to do that during Black August, especially, you know, and Lamont saying, you know, I don't want these British coming over here playing roles. They Africans, brother. John Boyega is an African. Now I can depart with him in terms of some of the role choices, but hey, who wouldn't be in Star Wars after all? But if the only line you get for most of the movie is "Prue, Prue," then you gotta ask yourself. I mean, somebody wrote this script, it wasn't you, but damn. But at any rate, but you take that job, right? So you had to do that. But okay, well, you know, they cloned Tyrone. He could play. He get the accent. It actually started when we were talking about the birthday of Fred Hampton, who, you know, one of our heroes, certainly one of Lamont's heroes, as he talked about, and he did Fred Hampton. You know, Lamont, great as comedians are often, can great mimic the voice. You know, I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary. Peace, if you're willing to fight for it. You know, but in that role, you had Daniel Kaluuya, who played, you know, Fred Hampton, and so, you know, for a moment then we pushed some of the names. You know, it's okay. Well, you don't like Africans from England or other places coming here. You know, I didn't like Cynthia Erivo as Harriet Tubman, but that's because I didn't like the film. I thought it was trash. It wasn't because she's not incredibly talented, which she is. We can talk about that. The made up black male characters, all the mess. But that ain't it. I said, so Forrest Whitaker shouldn't have played Idi Amin. Certainly not in that trash film, The Last King of Scotland, but he did. And y'all clowned Forrest Whitaker to this day, as Deontay Wilder would say, to this day, he gets clowned for the way he portrayed the priest in Black Panther, the spirit of the Black Panther. Yeah. Not sure that's necessarily any better or worse than Boyega in The Woman King. Behold, the Woman King. Okay. Okay. Now he's African, but he's from England. He's born in England, but he's portraying the homie chief. Okay, I got it. I'm a Pan-Africanist. So, and I asked Lamont, you know, you feel about Denzel Washington playing Steve Biko, which was the breakout role of his career. Because remember, on YouTube, you can find that interview he had where he's sitting there telling that white interviewer, and Viola Davis sitting right next to him. This is, I guess, some Fences was getting ready to come out, or maybe it was Fences on Broadway they were doing, because this was before the film. And he says, you know, they approached me to do this movie called The N-Word They Couldn't Kill, except he uses the word in the clip. He says, yeah, he had raped a white woman and they're going to put him to death. So they electrocuted him somehow in a way it didn't work. And so, and he was like, oh yeah, it'll be funny. And he said, oh yeah, it's funny. Like if some Jews went in a gas chamber and they turned on it and they thought he was taking a shower and the gas came out. And they said, that shit ain't funny. He said, yeah, that shit ain't funny either. He said, he called Sidney Poitier and he said, what should I do? I mean, they offered me a lot of money to play this role in this movie, The N-Word They Couldn't Kill. And Poitier told this stage trained actor, who along with Samuel L. Jackson, American Negro Theater, and then Fordham, had gone there for theater. He told him, he said, I ain't gonna tell you what to do, but I'm gonna tell you the first 2 or 3 roles you take in your career will shape the rest of your career. So you should decide. Washington said, I turned that down. And the next offer I got was for Cry Freedom. So by Lamont kind of joking logic, because he came around, he pan-Africanist, Denzel, it's okay for him to play Steve Biko, but it's not okay for John Boyega to be in the Clone Tower. He said he liked John Boyega, but he didn't give a pass to David Oyelowo, who played Martin Luther King, didn't give a pass to Daniel Kaluuya, who played Fred Hampton, or Cynthia Erivo, who played Harriet Tubman, but Denzel gets a pass? Okay, for playing Steve Biko. Whitaker gets a pass for playing Edie Amin. Okay, Chad gets a pass. Bozeman for playing a mythical African. And much of the language in Black Panther was Casa, as we know. That Casa was coached in some ways by a beautiful, brilliant actor, John Kani, the elder, who played T'Challa's father in the film. Y'all know him. Goes all the way back to Cry the Beloved Country back in the 50s. But at any rate, but Lamont came around because the logic fell apart. You know what I'm saying? The logic falls apart when we start talking about these national boundaries. So as James Baldwin from America, who has been anchored in this race concept since he was born, one he's fighting his way out of, is sitting there in West Africa listening to Sheikh Anta Diop, this African who's also a Pan-Africanist, talk about the African origin of civilization, the cultural unity of Africa, and how we need to come together politically to match the culture and the intellectual work we have to do to no longer be ignorant, to see ourselves beyond ourselves. Baldwin is like, I wasn't very interested in that. It didn't really retain my interest. And I said, this was the missed opportunity of this genius from New York, this African who understood so well the connections if he could just see beyond himself, who saw beyond himself, but who saw beyond himself to say that whiteness, you call yourself white, but you're not white. You're trapping yourself by trying to trap me. All of that's true. But brother, there is a cultural grounding that you are so connected with. And the writers of your generation are so connected with. When you see his book, The Evidence of Things Not Seen, on the Atlanta child murders, and you read that against Tony Cade's book, Who Never Leaves My Shelf, These Bones Are Not My Child, about the Atlanta child murders, it's clear you understand the depth of that connection, that power. And there's a missed moment when I think maybe one conversation with Sheikh Anta Diop could have turned James Baldwin into somebody who would recognized and written about in the way that Edward Franklin Frazier wrote about at the end of his life in an essay called The Failure of the Negro Intellectual. He could have made him see, like Edward Franklin Frazier, E. Franklin Frazier saw at the end of his life, that while the American Negro is talking about the race problem, the world is talking about the human issue. And Africans in the world, the thinkers, are having conversations with each other about the broader African world and about the questions of humanity, the questions of how we build better societies. And meanwhile, the American Negro is obsessed with the race problem and how it can be solved. Baldwin would have seen that. Boom. Baldwin saw it, I'm sure. But in that moment, you missed that moment with Sheikh Anta Diop. I don't know whether it was the language barrier, because Diop's giving that presentation in French, no doubt. And Baldwin, while he lived in France and understood French, maybe he just wasn't, maybe something else was occupying his mind. But that thing that Baldwin fought so beautifully through over the course of his life, grappling with this question of race and how to transcend it, would have been weaponized with a little bit of that, to borrow again from the little professor of Piney Woods, Lawrence Jones, sitting in our own self, regardless of what the majority thinks. So, but that clip we saw from the National Press Club, he's talking about what he calls American virtues. And here are the 3 he talks about. The insistence on being simple-minded. Keep it stupid. Keep it short, stupid. Keep it simple-minded. He says sincerity is what they say neutralizes simplicity, being simple-minded. Yes, I'm simple-minded, but I'm sincere. He says in America, in the United States of America, that sincerity neutralizes the simplicity. Yeah, you're stupid, but you're sincere. So we'll, But he says that sincerity coupled with the weaponized ignorance, what I would call the weaponized ignorance, but that simple-mindedness combined with the sincerity then feeds an immaturity, he says. He says these are American virtues. He says as long as you're sincere in what you say, you don't have to know what you're talking about.
A beautiful Baldwin turn of phrase. As long as you know what you're saying. I'm sorry, as long as you're sincere, you don't have to know what you're talking about. I'm going to do it 3 times in the spirit of Umar Johnson. As long as you're sincere, you don't have to know what you're talking about. I'm looking at these people now that Vice President Harris is the Democratic nominee, who have been recycled from the margins of CNN and all these other places. These people who have been brought back in because your only job is to talk about the race problem in flat, simple terms and to argue with completely ignorant but sincere white commentators. CNN is perfected it. You got this ignorant hillbilly horde fool over here with a smirk on his face talking crazy, but he's sincere. And you got a black person over here either reduced to tears or, you know, speaking from the okay, yeah, all this simple-mindedness, but they sincere, so therefore they get a pass. And what does it feed? An immaturity. And in 1985, James Baldwin, if you watch the interview, the National Press Club conversation, he says, yeah, and that's how you end up with an 80-year-old adolescent running the country. He's talking, of course, about Ronald Wilson Reagan. Isn't it ironic that a man who was never smart on the best day of his life, which clearly whatever disease has plagued him for years and gone untreated, or whether it's just deterioration, natural deterioration, is now running for president of the United States at 78, standing on graves, smiling with thumbs up, saying he would vote against an abortion ban. Is the only reason he's in the damn race in the first place, and the only reason he became the United States, and the Christian soldiers are trembling. But you ain't got to worry about that, because Donald John Trump is a liar to his DNA. He gonna say whatever need to be said at this point, and he's desperate now because they done found a sincere white man who actually knows something in Tim Walz and strapped his rocket as a booster to the campaign of Kamala Harris, who didn't take any of the racialized, simple-minded bait of Donna Bash. Donna Bash. You said you weren't black. What do you say? Let's move on. More than that. The hell do you think I am? Think I just fell out of a coconut tree? Donna Bash. A human joke. Simple-minded but sincere. Whose immaturity is the brand of mass commercial news entertainment media in the United States of America. As long as you're sincere, you don't have to know what you are talking about. Baldwin later on in that conversation says, you know, one of the things that has afflicted the United States is this aversion to history. Ironic he said that. Ironic he says that. Here we are, last day of August, Black August. Everything from the Haitian Revolution to George and Jonathan Jackson. Everything from the birth of Marcus Mosiah Garvey to the International Day for Recognition of African People. On the 31st, the International Day of People of African Descent. I would ask people to spend a little time, and I'm going to see if I can pull it up very quickly here. I should have it over here somewhere. Yeah. Message for the International Day for People of African Descent. This message was distributed today by the Secretary General of the United Nations. Says, on the International Day for People of African Descent, we honor the immense and diverse contributions of people of African descent to the vast spectrum of human achievements and their tireless efforts to create a better world. The leadership, courage, and activism of people of African descent have helped overcome profound injustices, saved lives, improved societies, and brought crucial issues to the world's attention. Yet the intolerable legacies of enslavement and colonialism endure. Systemic racism is rife and continues to mutate into new forms, including new technologies where algorithms can amplify discrimination. This is the Secretary General Guterres of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres of the United Nations, today, August 31st, 2024, the International Day for People of African Descent. Now we enter the last quarter and we're getting ready to go hard at it, friends. These last 4 months of the decade of people of African descent, the lifetime of people of African descent, all of us, but this decade, we better take these last 4 months on. Everybody in Knubia knows this Monday night, we will do the overview. And then the following Monday, we start the new iteration of the Introduction to Africana Studies course. If you're not yet signed up for Knarrative and not yet in Knubia, please check it, because we can, and check your voter registration. Check your voter registration in the spirit of Umar Johnson. Check your voter registration. We did it live on the air when we were on Sirius last week. Let me check my voter registration. Greg, Carr, boom. You are not registered. Oh, no, wait a minute. Gregory. That's the name my daddy gave me. Boom. It's on my social security card. Boom. I am registered. Okay, very good. Because they throwing people off. You shove them off. That's the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, his punk friend, the attorney general of Texas, Paxton. And there are enough human beings in Texas to wipe those white nationalists off the face of the electoral world. But they busted up in people's houses earlier this week. This punk ass attorney general, Paxton, a punk, sent these election integrity soldiers, thugs in uniform, busted up in people's houses. What you looking for? Voter registration cards. You helping people to run. 87-year-old grandmother reported in the New York Times. This sister, they done busted up in her house. Latina sister, Chicano sister, Hispanic sister. All these social structure labels on this human being, this indigenous bred human being, sitting in a state that was a settler colony when these white boys tried to wipe all they people out or turn them into something else. Tiana is the way you read Kelly Hernandez's book, Bad Mexicans, talking about this foolishness that they impose on these human beings. Y'all punk ass police busted up in this lady's house, pushed past her and go rifling through all her stuff, including her unmentionables drawer. You looking through a 87-year-old grandmama's drawers for what? Voter registration cards? What you looking for? Tell us. No. We know what the warrant says. We know what your punk attorney general say. But when you went through the unmentionables drawers, I want you to voice the unvoiced thing. That's the thing James Baldwin will be talking about. The deep-seated thing that's in your heart. Past the perversion, the fear. Past the perversion, the fear. Underneath the hate is the fear. What you scared of? What you scared of? Look through an 87-year-old woman's drawers. You ain't looking for a voter registration card. You're looking for your identity. You're looking for your self-respect. You're looking for your manhood in that grandmother's underwear. Sir, you need to go read some James Baldwin, or better yet, you need to watch as we roll over you like the ocean. And you will either be transformed or left behind in the backwash of history. But that's what they did in Texas this week. So check your voter registration, check your voter registration, check your voter registration. And in thinking about what Gutierrez said on the International Day for People of African Descent, he's saying, yet the intolerable legacies of enslavement and colonialism endure. Systemic racism is rife and continues to mutate into new forms, including new technologies where algorithms can amplify discrimination, meaning that we are now in a system where the narratives through the algorithms can shift the way we think about things that we don't know anything about, but we're sincere. I'm sincere on Twitter. I'm sincere on X. I'm sincere on Facebook and TikTok. I'm sincere. So you can't blame me if I'm just glossing something on the way to talk to somebody because I'm a teacher. Yeah, we're all teachers. We're all learning at the same time, but that don't mean all the information is the same. And that ignorance gets weaponized in a society for which the immaturity is fed by a sincerity that is linked to a know-nothingness, a simple-mindedness. One of the things that has afflicted this country, according to James Baldwin, is its aversion to history. Finally, in the UN column, Secretary General says, at the United Nations, this is a priority. He said, we must build on the work of people of African descent with global action to eradicate the scourge of racism and racial discrimination at the United Nations. This is a priority, and we have established a new anti-racism office. Time out. Do you know why Fox News is not apoplectic at this announcement? Do you know why they ain't debating it between fake commentators on CNN? Do you know why the head hasn't exploded from Donald Trump Jr. or Junior Varsity Vance? Do you know why none of that has happened? It's because they don't know about it. Simple-mindedness. Today, the UN Secretary General says, at the United Nations, this is a priority, and we have established a new anti-racism office. Hey, the hillbilly governor of Alabama, Kay Ivey, she can't sign no legislation out of Montgomery that was passed a block from Martin Luther King and Vernon John's pulpit. She can't sign no legislation anti-DAI. She can't sign no legislation in Alabama that would get rid of DEI on campuses so that the niggers that we cheer on the football field won't have a little office in the student center in Tuscaloosa. She can't sign no legislation in Montgomery to stop the United Nations from establishing a new anti-racism office. This is the United Nations. You see, not the punk ass United States of America or the punk ass governor of Alabama and her hillbilly horde in Montgomery. This is not them. See, when we see each other, when we see ourselves, we roll over them like the sea, friends. When we were at the United Nations in the spring, and you walk out the UN building and look across the street, and that big ass tower with the communication satellite on the top is the United States State Department, because they surveil everything that come out of there. We don't give a damn. You're listening to it right now. Welcome, friends. Hello. Hello. You think you're going to stop us from learning, from connecting? You don't know world history. And you don't know how these things go. Secretary General says this will drive implementation. This new anti-racism office, you can't stop it. It ain't in Tuscaloosa. No, it's in the world. This will drive implementation of our strategic plan to address racism in the workplace. Yeah. So you can't do nothing about it, Jack Daniels. You done made your whole damn life off of Uncle Nearest, but DEI at Jack Daniels, you can't touch this. They're going to address racism in the workplace. Where? Everywhere. We also need governments to take the lead. And here's where the UN's teeth fall out. They become toothless. Because we know that the member countries fund the UN. And we know the UN was born in San Francisco in 1945. Its headquarters are in Geneva and New York. New York's where most of the people are stationed. And we talked a long time about Ralph Johnson Bunch. Y'all can go in the archive and have that conversation with, we particularly highlighted Cal Rastiala's book, the Most Indispensable Man, about Ralph Bunch, the most recent book on Ralph Bunch, although there's a bunch of them. Brian Urquhart, Ralph Bunch himself wrote, Charles P. Henry, you know, Model Negro or American Other. That's one of the best books as far as I'm concerned on Ralph Johnson Bunch. But we know that part of the reason it's here is because the United States keep an eye on it. And the United States constantly trying to strangle out the UN on a lot of stuff. We'll come back to that in a minute, because the killers of the Israeli Defense Force have been busy. They're in the West Bank 3 times this week. Dozens of people killed. Civilians. They claim they hunting. Okay, they are hunting. They're hunting human beings, though. They're really being indiscriminate about this, including refugee camps. Go to hell, IDF. But we'll come back to that, because the United Nations trying to intervene. But what can the United Nations do when it's got a stranglehold on it by the funders? It still doesn't prevent the conversations. If you ever get a chance to go to the United Nations, spend some time in those halls and just listen to the conversations. If you get a chance to sit in on some of the conversations, you realize some of this stuff that we're doing is very close to being able to be implemented. We could just get some of these jackbooted thugs off of our necks who hide behind the flags of their various countries. And we can do it, because we have done it. He goes on to say, we need the private sector to step up, he says. He said, we need governments to take the lead by advancing and implementing policies and laws to tackle systemic racism and ensure inclusion. Well, if the fascists get back into the White House, you can be clear that they're going to do a whole lot of stuff. And for those thinking that they're going to pass legislation to do a nationwide abortion ban, or they're going to try it. But I was reading something the other day that made a lot of sense to me. And I was a little, not frustrated, because this is where time takes, see, it takes time to study. You can't gloss this stuff. That's why the TikTok folk, God bless you. God bless you for translating. For the people who are translating on TikTok because they've deeply studied something and figured out a way to build a bridge, especially people like Baba Lloyd here in Knubia, who reads straight from the books on TikTok and helps share the language. That's very powerful. The other people whose heads are always floating and stuff pops up behind them, they Google something on the way to make a video to teach somebody something. I'm good. I'll hold off on that. But when he says we also need governments to take the lead by advancing and implementing policies and laws to tackle systemic racism and ensure inclusion, they may pass a national abortion ban in the United States. They may do a lot of other things. They certainly want to get rid of DEI and all that. As you saw in the news today, this week, Massachusetts Institute of Technology became the latest quote-unquote Ivy League school to see the number of Black applicants who were admitted into MIT plummet in the wake of the Supreme Court's case. So all that stuff, the United States is not going to, be participating in what the UN is asking them to do, especially if Trump gets back in. But even if he doesn't, they've got the court in place. And this is where I was going with the abortion thing. I was reading something. I said, damn, see, it takes time to study. And I should have caught this and thought about it more. And I will going forward. Some of y'all caught it. Many of you, perhaps. I just didn't. And I always know that a lot of people caught it. The idea they may not have to pass any legislation to do a national ban. They may simply refer to the Dobbs decision, and believe me, you know these lawyers are going to go to court and argue that the national ban should exist as a matter of interpreting the Constitution, First Amendment, 14th Amendment, having been taken out of play with the penumbra of rights argument and privacy. Now they can say you don't need to pass any new legislation. Look for them to try that, especially if they lose the election. Finally, the Secretary General says we need the private sector to step up, including rooting out bias in technology and other dimensions of working life, and we need reparatory justice to address the crimes of enslavement. My God, reparatory justice. We're going to linger that in a minute as we kind of wind up with this. We're going to move forward in a minute. Reparatory justice, keep that in mind. Building on the success of the last decade, I hope states will proclaim a second international decade for people of African descent to help accelerate global efforts for true change. So in the end of this decade, he's saying, now let's do a second decade. Remember, Africa is poised, but at this moment, fraught with potential, the predators have descended again on Africa. They never really left, but they've intensified it. We're going to talk about that in a minute too. He finally says, together, let's do our part to vanquish racism and discrimination and build a world of equality, opportunity, and justice for all. It's a beautiful thing. So here we are on the question of African experience and possibility. Baldwin anchored in this vision of human possibility, the things that have to be pushed back. Here we are in the decade for people of African descent. Here we are on the day, the 31st of August, 2024, message for the International Day of People of African Descent, Secretary General. And he recognizes on this day the work that started the decade, friends. Here's the work that started the decade. The work that started the decade was a meeting from the 31st of August. Today marks the anniversary. To the 7th of September, the 7th of September, the year was 2001. We don't remember. Most of us, some of us do. Many people in this room, some of y'all were there. We're there with Mashariki Jawanza and Conrad Worrell. We're there with the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. We're there with the international contingent of Africans that came from all over the world. We're there with the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere who have been assaulted for centuries by these Europeans. We're there with the freedom-seeking, justice and liberation-seeking humans from all over the world. Almost 200 countries convened from the 31st of August to the 7th of September 2001 at the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance. That was where the idea for the International Decade was born. The International Day was born. And when they marked the International Day, they recognized the United Nations this week today that it was what they called the Durban meeting. Jack Cole knows about that. She's stationed in Durban right now. The Durban meeting. Now, let's contrast this. Thinking about this in the country James Baldwin was born in, the country I was born in, us Africans, all of us who were born in the United States, this country we were born in. Everybody knows, and let me, this isn't office hours, but I'm going to take the opportunity here since we got both live chats going. If I can pull up the Knubia chat, well, I got it on my app. I got the YouTube join up too. Here it is here. Folks are talking with each other. It's a beautiful thing. Oh, hey, Dream Sequia, you're a new viewer. Welcome to us. New participant. We're all together. It is in class. So, and I said I was going to do more of this. Let me go here on the Knubia app. Does anybody remember who the Secretary of State of the United States of America was in 2001, September 2001? I'm sure you do, because some people will call it a DEI hire, although it was not. Somebody put it in the chat. I'm gonna see which one does first, YouTube or Knubia. Here we go. Here we go. Somebody, I'm looking. It's gonna take a second for me to see it. Don't get mad, get smart. That's right. That's right. Don't get mad, get smart. John Henry Clark would say that. Somebody put it here. Who put it here? Nobody? Close. Rice was the National Security Advisor. We're gonna talk about Condi from Birmingham. Colin Powell. Thanks, Prof. Golden. Thanks, Raymond Larry. It's probably a quick. There it is. Both at the same time. Condi and Colin Powell. Those are the two figures in place. September 2001. But guess what? We know that within the week, An event happened that wiped this completely from the consciousness. September 11th, 2001. But let's go to the beautiful videotape. In 1997, the United Nations General Assembly decided to hold the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance. The conference was held 4 years later, August 31st to September the 7th in Durban, South Africa. The outcome of the UN of the conference was the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. I am going to the Office of Human Rights of the United Nations, and now I am moving over to drop this in the chats, and I know people will have it just dropped in the YouTube chat because that's the one I have up on the computer. I will have to look now for, here we go. Here's the in class. Here, I know I had the narrative chat up here. That's right. Play the tape. Play that beautiful, roll that beautiful beam footage. Okay, I put in the chats the document that came out of Durban. And now we're going to talk about the difference between American Negroes obsessed with simple-mindedness, sincerity, and the ignorance that leads to state immaturity, going to connect that and the trap of race to the world communion. Because guess what? In fact, let me just go to it because I pulled that up too. This is from the New York Times, September the 5th, 2001. Ready? Are you ready? Here we go. A little class this morning. Why not? We have a little class this morning. Jane Perlez wrote the article, How Powell Decided to Shun Conference. Washington, September 4th. Then I got to wrap this up. Secretary of State Colin Powell first heard the United Nations Conference on Racism when learning the ropes of the State Department in January. He was urged by a senior Clinton administration official to mark the date in his calendar and to go to Durban and tell his own remarkable story as emblematic of progress in civil rights in this country. In other words, you know what American Negroes are to the social structure? Success stories that you can use to say, ha ha, look how far the Negro has come. Okay, Colin Powell, people from Jamaica, raised in New York, the Bronx High School of Science, cleans up. I think it's Bronx High School of Science. In fact, I wanted to check this against his bio, but his bio I got a signed copy of that too, and it's in storage. But at any rate, Powell, they want Powell to go to say, look how far the Negro has come going to the UN, as if the world don't know what the hell has gone on against black people in this country. Continuing, he says, the secretary expressed immediate interest. Some people who were in the room said they remembered in the following months until almost the last moment when President Bush said the United States would not take part if, quote, they pick on Israel, end quote. Secretary Powell told colleagues, including Kofi Annan, remember the Ghanaian who was the Secretary General of the United Nations at the time, told colleagues, including Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the United Nations, that he felt duty-bound as the first Black Secretary of State to attend. Kofi Annan, who went to Achimota, who went to the same boarding school, not Piney Woods in Mississippi, but the boarding school in Accra, same school that Aikwe Amal went to, in fact. But anyway, he said, I will be there. He said he felt duty-bound. That's what he told Kofi Annan. Powell told Annan, I feel duty-bound to attend as the first Black Secretary of State. But if Secretary Powell felt the pull of racial solidarity, Condoleezza Rice, yassa, some of them are smart. Others not so much. I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing. Shout out to Byron Donalds. But if Secretary Powell felt the pull of racial solidarity, Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor and the administration's other highly visible Black official, look at my African American, the other visible Black official, looked at the conference proposed agenda and was alarmed. When Michael Posner, the executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, called on her in March to encourage the administration's participation, he found her highly critical of a proposal that the United States pay reparations for slavery. He said in an interview from Durban today, the ups and downs of the administration's position on the conference, a delegation of mid-level American officials quit the meeting on Monday. So they sent a mid-level delegation, not Powell. Rice won that fight. Won that fight. Dr. Rice won that fight. Dr. Rice from Birmingham. Her daddy worked at the same high school that Colin Powell's wife, Alma, who recently made transition, her daddy worked at. Them two knew each other. Colin Powell's wife's father, segregated high school in Birmingham. I have the history of the high school over here. Somebody will put the name in the chat. I can't remember, and I can't go over and dig into that section to go look for it. I hope I didn't put it in storage because I just bought it not too long ago, maybe about a year ago. I was in the South and I found it and I've been reading. It's fascinating because that is the That's the storied high school in Birmingham. Somebody, I almost called it Henderson. Anyway, somebody will call it in one of the chats. Powell's wife, Alma, daddy worked there, and Connie Rice's daddy was, one of them was the principal. I forget whether it was Rice's father or Alma Powell's father. But anyway, she went to school with several of those girls who got blown up at 16th Street Baptist Church in September 1963. Oh, but Condi got a prize. Yes. The ups and downs of the administration's position on the conference, a delegation of mid-level American officials quit the meeting on Monday, reflects the competing pressures and conflicting opinions at the most senior levels over many months. Within the White House, there were shades of difference. Some officials who deal with domestic issues, like Josh Bolton, remember that name? The Deputy White House Chief of Staff, saw an advantage in showcasing the United States' progress on race. But others, particularly Ms. Rice, and another National Security Council official, remember Elliot Abrams, were concerned about language that singled out Israel. I'm going to let that sit. I'm going to let that sit for a split second before I continue reading. Language that singled out the United States, language that singled out England or France, that singled out French demanding reparations from Haiti and getting them for a century and a half over the Haitian Revolution, singled out England for starting this mess, singled out, no, none of them, singled out Israel. Going back, as a follow-up, Henderson, the executive director of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, an umbrella group of more than 150 major civil rights organizations, wrote to Secretary Powell, asking for a discussion on the issues of the conference. A polite reply to the chairwoman of the group, Dorothy Irene Height, went no further than thanking her for her interest, said an official of the group. Similarly, human rights groups sent a letter to Secretary Powell asking for a meeting to discuss the administration's participation, Mr. Posner said. The secretary said his schedule was full. Colin Powell, they strangled him. They kneecapped him, Condi on the other side. Oh, man, I wish I could have heard the conversations between Secretary Powell's wife, Alma, and him, because she's been knowing Condi since the Alabama days. You see? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm going to go all the way to the end. Powell got presented with a couple of options from that punk-ass George W. Bush. He could go to the conference and try to change the agenda, go give a speech and leave, or send Lauren Craner, the Assistant Secretary for Human Rights, with the option of walking out in protest if necessary. The day before Mr. Bush's statement, Mr. Harris was among about a dozen people to receive an invitation to attend the conference as a member of the United States delegation. Mr. Harris said, David Harris, the executive director of the American Jewish Committee, said, the White House official in charge of the task force on the conference and indicated that the delegation would be headed by either Mr. Secretary Powell or Mr. Kramer, either the secretary or his deputy for human rights. When asked by civil rights and human rights officials, the White House and Secretary Powell said Secretary Powell's attendance was a matter of his personal decision. They made him fall on his sword, that punk-ass, ignorant George W. Bush. Remember, I'm stupid, but I'm sincere. So you can have, in terms of affirmative action, I'm talking about real affirmative action, not this shit they were talking about with us. Whiteness, white maleness. You can have a George W. Bush be the president. You can have a Donald Trump be the president. And he came out against it and then said, well, if Powell wants to go, it's his decision. As if he ain't gonna take orders. You think we never forgot? Reba and I stood in the UN General Assembly auditorium where Colin Powell shook that little vial of chalk. And he's still fighting in Iraq. Today's New York Times got a story of 7 U.S. soldiers wounded because they was over there yesterday killing people in Iraq. But if Secretary Powell saw any possibility of going, Mr. Bush's statement foreclosed that. About 6 hours after Mr. Bush's announcement, Secretary Powell returned from a week-long vacation. It was a Friday evening, and the secretary was wearing a baseball cap, a sign of a relaxed mood. At a fairly large meeting gathered for the final decision, he opened by asking, quote, where's the language, end quote. When he was told that the anti-Israel language had not changed because at the UN conference, they met in Geneva to work on preliminary documents. And one of the things they introduced was part of the resolution saying Zionism is racism. I don't care what you think about Zionism. That's not the point. The point is, people who say Zionism is not racism are organized enough to kneecap anything. I don't care what that thing is. When you got that one issue and you organize, you can wash over Jamal Bowman in New York or Cori Bush in Missouri. You can literally cause the United States not to send the first Negro to be Secretary of State to the World Conference Against Racism. And he wanted to go. But his friend Yassa said, I don't want to go, massa. You have been good to me. And I'm concerned because they talking about reparations. Reparations. We want that language stripped out, and we want the Zionism as racism language stripped out. They stripped out the Zionism as racism language, in fact, ultimately. And yet it wasn't enough. And so Colin Powell did communicate with the World Conference Against Racism on the 3rd. Once they was clear they weren't gonna get the language they want, this is how Colin Powell, this is the letter he sent. He released on September the 3rd, 2001, when it was clear that the world don't give a damn. Okay, we got to fight. We ain't gonna fight on all fronts. The Zionism is racism, we know, but we gonna take that out. The reparations will soften the language. Guess what? You heard the Secretary General on today, August 31st, 2024, talk about reparatory justice. That's right. We're gonna keep in though that all these countries, the England, France, Spain, y'all all owe the African continent reparations. See, this is the problem. I'm speaking now to the black nativists, the black face nativists. As the descendants of those who were held captive, who were descendants of those who were not. Did not your ancestors have ancestors? When you weaken the justice claim of reparations by delinking yourself from the African world, from not seeing outside yourself, you doom your objective. Oh, you doom it. I don't care whether it's active African actors born other places playing Africans born in the United States or vice versa, or holding yourself in that funky settler flag you wrapped yourself in as if your master in your mind is somehow going to feel compassion for you. You have delinked yourself from the potential of a global force that will get everything you want if we stick together. Colin Powell. Once it was clear that the world didn't give a damn, almost 200 countries are there, including your little delegation, and you wanted to be there, but your friend from Birmingham and all them white boys was like, you can't go, Negro, but it's your choice. Go tell the press. You stay and fall on your own sword. And in a minute, we're going to have you shaking some chalk because within the week, 2 towers are going to go down to New York, a plane going to land in the field in Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon you work in about to get hit. So we're going to need you to sing the national anthem on the steps of everything we send you to. And we're going to, in fact, we ain't got to tell you that because you believe what your whole heart, you were a soldier. We're going to need you to do that. We don't even know we're going to need you to do that because while they're worried about Durban, 9/11 has already been planned. Those people are already in the country. Colin Powell sent this communique once it was clear that the world going to do what the world's going to do. Colin Powell wrote on September 3rd, 2001, today, I have instructed our representatives at the World Conference Against Racism to return home. Well, shit, if there's any black people, they should have stayed over there. I have taken this decision with regret. I guess that's Powell's clapback. He's a good soldier, literally. I have taken this decision with regret because the importance of the international fight against racism and the contribution that the conference could have made to it. But following discussions today by our team in Durban, and instructions from your boss, and others who are working for a successful conference, whoever that is, I'm convinced that that will not be possible. I know that you do not combat racism by conferences that produce declarations containing hateful language. Who wrote this? He's gone now. Some of which is a throwback to the days of Zionism equals racism. A throwback to the days, what was that, yesterday? James Baldwin at the National Press Club said this, echoing, although he didn't do it because he was conscious of what Andy Thompson had been saying for decades. Remember last week we talked about history being about the future 2 weeks ago? Anderson Thompson, the great Professor Anderson Thompson, Andy Thompson used to always say, all history is about the future. At the National Press Club, James Baldwin said, less than a year before he died, people are ignorant about history in the United States, but they don't understand history is about the present. And in the question and answer, somebody asked him, said, when are black people going to get over it? However, he said, get over what? History is about the present. Shout out to Byron Donalds. History is about the present. Shout out to Kamala Harris, ain't black. History is about the present. Shout out to the National Society of Black Journalists who allowed Donald Trump to come in there and spew that racism over 4 black women and nobody hustled his ass out of the damn building. History is about the present. You see, shout out to the hillbilly elegy. History is about the present. Shout out to somebody with deeper hillbilly roots who is not a racist, Tim Walls. And that's a true shout out. Not a joke, to be clear. James Baldwin said history is about the present. And so Colin Powell saying some of that language is a throwback to the days of Zionism equals racism. Yeah, that's a throwback to like the resolution today, which is why your master told you to write this letter or told your aide to write this letter. And if I had all my books here, I would pull those books because Clarence Duzain wrote a whole book about this, Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell. And I don't remember whether or not in the footnotes he names the person who drafted this. We will continue or supports the idea, Powell writes, or under Powell's signature is said that we have made too much of the Holocaust. Or suggest that apartheid exists in Israel. Oh, shit. Excuse me, y'all. I know some children in here. I apologize. Or suggest that apartheid exists in Israel. Are you serious right now? That ethno state where at this moment they killing people. Occupied. Even the white commercial news entertainment media has to use the word occupied because you ain't supposed to be in Gaza and West Bank. You in Gaza. Now you bombing in Lebanon. Now you bombing again in the West Bank. You done killed a couple dozen people in the last few days, including 7 members of our family. Ain't got nothing to do with it. And you tell your mouthpieces around the world that you hunting for these terrorists. Okay, that's legitimate from your standpoint and from the standpoint of you're trying to survive as a country. Okay, understood. That's war. Like it, don't like it, agree, disagree. But you kill that baby was a terrorist. You're a liar to your DNA. You're a liar to your warped soul. And James Baldwin not only understood that, he wrote about it. James Baldwin said, I gotta leave this funky ass country. I'm telling you what James Baldwin didn't do. He didn't hide from the hard conversations. This warped vision of humanity warps you too, which is why millions in the street in Israel, millions in Tel Aviv over the arc of the last year, millions have protested the government of the mass murderer Bibi Netanyahu. What you gonna say to them, Bibi? These your people. Meanwhile, the Palestinians who live in Israel, including the Afro-Palestinians and the Israelis who protest, including the Afro-Israelis, can tell you a little bit about racial discrimination in that ethno state. And yes, this man, this wholly owned subsidiary of white supremacy, who is so admirable in so many ways, who understands in so many ways, but in order to fulfill his ambition and his commitment, his sincerity, James Baldwin, commitment to making American society better as he sees it, would put in a communique under his signature to argue that apartheid don't exist in Israel. James Earl Carter in his last days, and Jimmy Carter built out of something because he's still holding on. He said, he told his grandson this week, who told the world, Jimmy Carter said, I'm just trying to live long enough to vote for Kamala Harris. Well, I'll be damned. Come on, James Earl in Plains. Even Jimmy Carter wrote a whole book, Peace, Not Apartheid. It's an apartheid state. I'm reading my Bible. I'm reading it. Not like Donald Trump, who's selling it, but ain't never read it. Not Junior Varsity Vance. Not these white nationalists masquerading as Christians, who everybody from David Walker to Martin King would say, oh, no. Everybody from Fannie Lou Hamer to Prathia Hall would say, oh, no, this is not Christianity. But say y'all on something else. Y'all on that Klan-ish. Understood. So he says, I deeply respect the goals of South African President Mbeki and Foreign Minister Zuma in hosting this conference. I strongly support the good work of Secretary General Annan to make it come out right. The United States and delegations interested in successful outcome had worked productively in Durban on other key issues of the conference, and we're hopeful they could be resolved. I wish it could have turned out more successfully. Released on September the 3rd, 2001. I'm sorry, Colin. I'm sorry that they had your manhood, your personhood, your humanityhood trapped. In that same issue, September the 5th, 2001, New York Times, I was reading from, there was another article on the front page at Race Talks, delegates cite early doubts. The last quote, it says, last week, Secretary of State Colin Powell formally announced that he would not attend the conference because the dispute remained unresolved. The United States sent a mid-level delegation to negotiate instead. Those talks broke down on Monday when Arab nations rejected a compromise proposed by Norway and supported by the United States and Israel. Yeah, you know, the dirty work usually comes out of the EU. This time they got Norway to do it. The draft eliminated all phrases like, quote, racist settler ideology, end quote, and, quote, racist practices of Zionism, end quote. But it also eliminated any reflection of the Palestinian suffering. So they ain't even trying to bend over backwards to ignore reality to satisfy them. Last paragraph. The new negotiating team, which includes representatives from South Africa, Belgium, Norway, Knubia, and the Arab League, plans to complete its deliberations tomorrow. Today, Mary Robinson, UN Commissioner for Human Rights, says she believed that a chance still existed to salvage the conference by coming up with some consensus on language describing the Middle East conflict. She said she believed that the team would develop a declaration against racism that could be supported by all nations. I believe we're back on course. Ms. Robinson said, everybody knows time is short. We've come a long, long way to get here. And they did pass that resolution. And that resolution became the foundation for what we're talking about today. Not only the International Day for recognizing people of African descent, including reparations and eliminating all forms of discrimination, but the year, the decade of people of African descent. The other quote is from the other article, the first one I was read from, last paragraph, but for the final paragraph in the article. But for the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the decision was the right one. In a letter to Mr. Bush and Secretary Powell today, the executive director of the committee, Howard A. Carr, expressed, quote, our deepest appreciation for your unshakable resolve in opposing the effort to resurrect the previously discredited condemnation of Zionism as racism. Discredited by who? Not everything else I've read. So let's wind this up. Let's wind this up. This is serious business, y'all. We're in this season now. So, if you want to read, interesting enough, Lamont and I on Sirius had a conversation with this sister, the legend, the great Mary Frances Berry. This is the new book that she has edited with another friend, VP Franklin, Professor VP Franklin, and Sundiata Chajwa, Professor Sundiata Chajwa, one-time president of the National Council of Black Studies, Reparations and Reparatory Justice, Past, Present, and Future. It is just the latest addition to a shelf of books that deal with reparations. I mention it now because it ties itself to, in the timeline, it is in here, it ties itself to the World Conference Against Racism, because the long distance reparations fighters were there. And if you look at this language, you'll see here, in fact, let me see. Yeah, the same year that we attended, I wasn't able to go. I wish I could have gone. In retrospect, I should have done everything possible to go. By then, I was at Howard, and I remember them. Yeah, we need to go. Y'all you need to go. I wish I could go. It was my first year, into my second year at Howard, and I wish I had gotten on that plane with them. This was the same year that the Oklahoma legislature passed and Governor Frank Keating signed a bill to pay reparations for the destruction of the Greenwood, Oklahoma community known as Black Wall Street. Compensation was to be paid in the form of low-income student scholarships in Tulsa, an economic development authority for Greenwood, a memorial, and the awarding of medals to the 118 known living survivors of the destruction of Greenwood. So when we talk about these things, again, ignorance becomes the foundation for people getting away with everything. That was the same year that African people in the United States joined people from all over the world, including almost 200 nations, to go to the, thank you, Professor Hunter. You could have jumped in. Parker High School. Yes, I see it now. Robert Charles Johnson, Alma's father, was the principal. Thank you. That means that Condoleezza's daddy was the head guidance counselor. I remember one was the principal, one was the guidance counselor, because I read Condoleezza Rice's memoir, both of them, and the book Twice as Good, written by the Black reporter about Condoleezza Rice. I'm not talking about these people and they ain't gonna read about them, ain't gonna study them. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. One more time in the spirit of Umar Johnson. Yes. So, the UN World Conference Against Racism and Mary Frances Berry, they edit this volume, and we're going to air that next week, actually on Sirius, if you want to see that conversation. This book just came out, if you want to know more about it. But this is the process through which we have to think. Whether it be the Maroons in Jamaica, Chief Curry that we talked to this week from Accommong, the Cockpit County in Jamaica, whether it be Dr. Julius Garvey, Marcus and Amy Jakes Garvey's younger son. His brother made transition during COVID. We talked about it here in class, Marcus Garvey Jr., who's got a book coming out with the foreword by our brother Ta-Nehisi Coates, who has a book also coming out a couple of months that's going to deal with Palestine in the context of Black people and other things. But Justice for Marcus Garvey is Dr. Garvey's book, Dr. Julius Garvey's book. Ta-Nehisi wrote the foreword to the book. Look for Me in the Whirlwind. Justice for Marcus Garvey, Look for Me in the Whirlwind, November 2024. I think Ta-Nehisi's book comes out October the 1st, if memory serves me correct. So a month from now. But I want to wind up with a few things. Had to wait for a minute for delivery of this because it took me a little longer after I found the book somewhere to get it sent, because the United States Post Office got all kind of problems. This was in yesterday's paper. Now I know why. More than 3 years ago, the U.S. Postal Service unveiled a sweeping 10-year plan. Remember Louis DeJoy? They can get rid of Louis DeJoy now. Biden and replaced enough people. By the way, Joe, on your way out the door, as you turn out the lights, don't be scared. Do what Barack Obama didn't do. Issue a full exoneration of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. All right. Anyway, more. I wish Obama had done it, but I understand. Yes, I understand. Washington, more than 3 years ago, the U.S. Postal Service unveiled a sweeping 10-year plan meant to steer the organization out of financial crisis. The plan, which included consolidating locations, raising prices, and lengthening promised delivery times, was meant to stabilize an agency that had lost $87 billion over the past 14 years. And it goes on to say that they still are suffering because this plan has been reverberating. Two things. One thing, really, let's be very clear about this. The United States Post Office is run like a business, but it's not a business. It's a public service. The funky ass media narrates it like it's a private industry. It could lose $100 billion. We paying taxes, subsidize the postal service, fools. You're looking at it like, no, it'll be nice if it turned a profit, but it doesn't need to turn a profit. We need the mail. I need my books. Anyway, so, this is the anniversary. This week, those of you who are from New Orleans or part of the Katrina diaspora, you know that 19 years ago this week, beginning when they elevated it to a Cat 5 earlier in the week to when it hit the coast on the 30th of August, 29th and 30th of August. And then the 31st is the levees broke and the water rose. This is the week of Katrina. So we stop now to recognize those who lost their lives, those who were displaced, some of them permanently, who were on the third coast in Houston, some of those in Philly, places like Washington, D.C., when HBCUs reached out to Dillard and Xavier and took students to transfer. I was on faculty at Howard by that time. When the teenagers and early 20-somethings of many of our HBCUs, I know with Howard, Alternative Spring Break, that's when it was born. They sent a busload of young people down there. What can we do? In the spring of 2006. And that's when Alternative Spring Break was born. And God knows that as approaching 60, I love Alternative Spring Break. I went with those young people a couple of times to Detroit, but I can't sleep on church benches no more like I used to. My back ain't what it used to be. But I promise you, watching young people serve, being with them at the Salvation Army and at the shelter for unhoused folk and all around, being in the schools where I taught a class for a whole week in Highland Park High School. And a couple of those young people said, we want to come to Howard now. One of them, who hadn't been thinking about college, not only enrolled at Howard, they were able to admit him that week. And he graduated from Howard University. It's a beautiful thing. That's how we recognize each other beyond each other. That's how we see beyond ourselves. And so it's quite a moment. Oh, that's the one other thing. The last thing I want to mention today. It was in today's paper. No, yesterday. How do we, Prof, you asked at the beginning, how, a question you knew the answer to, then answered it. Self-determination, connecting the dots, connecting the people. That's what we're doing here in Knubia and Knarrative. That's what we're doing every Saturday in class, which includes beyond to the whole global view. Everybody with a link can connect. That's what we're doing every day of the week. That's what we do with our lives. And connecting these dots, we are able to build the bridges that will allow us to overpower those for whom flags don't mean anything, countries don't mean anything, borders don't mean anything. Capital is international. Even as at the front page of today's Financial Times weekend, you see, is it, no. Is it today? Oh, yeah, it's not the Financial Times. It's the New York Times. Hold on, friends. I got to find the doggone front page of today's Times. That's Friday's paper. Where is Saturday's paper? Okay. Y'all know how I am. You give me another 30 seconds and boom, there it is. Here it is. Look at the top. Kamala Harris get an interview to Donna Bash, who can't ask a question to save her life. Thank God she's not moderating because she didn't moderate the first debate. She asking questions. People nervous now because they heard the speech last week at the Democratic National Convention. Not us, not nervous. You know who's nervous? The big money boy. Yesterday's paper, now I can connect these dots properly. Yesterday's Financial Times. yesterday's Financial Times said J.D. Vance, and Lamont and I talked about this on the air, Vance presses billionaire Thiel to get off the sidelines and bankroll Trump. He calling his master Peter Thiel, say, man, get this man the money. He needs the money. Help us, help us. Why is money tied so deeply to election? Because money allows people to prey on ignorance. And when you're preying on ignorance, it allows you to tell people things that aren't true, but to do it in a way that allows you to allow that ignorance and that sincerity to feed into a maturity that will have you lose your life, because ignorant people are going to the voting booth pulling because they think, well, you know, Trump gave all that money to HBCUs. Y'all better go read some James Baldwin, or if you don't want to read, just play the clip. Hell no, it didn't happen, but you're going to repeat that shit in the barbershop. Well, you wasn't going to vote anyway. So everybody who's going to vote, check your registration, check your registration, check your registration. Front page of today's New York Times. Big donors ask Harris to ditch tax on richest. Oh, war and disease have, no. I'm sorry. Polio emerging as latest threat in Gaza conflict. The killers of the Israeli Defense Force now have some help. They've recruited disease, polio, indefensible, inhumane, global. You're a global pariah. The only place you're not a pariah is a handful of people and the institutions that they are able to wield some influence on to keep that cry down. What is that? What am I hearing? I'm hearing the whole damn world against murder. Against murder, friends. This is Andrew Differin and Theodore Schiffler on the big donors asking Harris to ditch tax on richest. Washington. Donors to Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign are pushing her to reconsider supporting a proposed tax on wealthiest Americans as some Wall Street and Silicon Valley executives try to reshape the Democratic nominee's governing agenda. Ms. Harris's campaign last week said she supported the tax increases, including in President Biden's latest White House budget proposal. One of those plans will require Americans worth at least $100 million to pay taxes on investment gains, even if they have not sold the stocks, bonds, or other assets that have appreciated. Under the plan, those Americans would owe 25% tax on a combination of their regular income, like wages, and so-called unrealized gains. Goes on. This tiny ass little group of people who think they control the world now calling Kamala Harris like, hey, ixnay on the axtay, nix the tax. This doesn't affect everybody. It affects me, damn it. And I got 50 yachts. I want 50 more, and I could buy them anyway. You know what? I just don't want to pay the tax. F the tax. Hey, I'm an Alabama fan. Tonight, Alabama's playing Joe Auburn. We're going to see it. Oh, they're in the Iron Bowl. It's a beautiful thing. Look at that. And yeah, next year, he's going to be playing for the Dallas Cowboys, and I own the team. Yeah, you know, I was out there spitting on some of them black people at Little Rock when I was in college, in high school, but now I own the Cowboys, man. I got one of them fast-ass Negroes from University of Alabama here. Oh, yeah, I'm not paying no taxes. But guess what? Capital is international, friends. Meaning what? While we worried about passports and borders and the idea that somebody would leave their country to come here because they love America so damn much, that's ignorance. You push them out of their country. We're interfering with their country. That's the vast majority of people that can't work in the places they're from. While you doing that, capital flows across state lines. They recognize no flag. All they recognize is wealth. So don't be stupid. Last article of the day, concluding. The billionaires calling Kamala saying, don't do that. How many votes you got? One, but I got a lot of money in the guy I own on the Supreme Court, one of the many I own, John Roberts, helped me pass Citizens United, which means I can flood the airways with ads to make you look at your lying eyes and deny them and believe some BS that you saw on TV. Or better yet, I'll get one of your ball players or rappers or runners to talk about it, and I'll just own one of them Negroes or one of them who wants to be with us, and we let them pretend like they're with us. Shout out to Curtis Jackson and Sean Carter. This is the last article of today. Capital is international. This is from the Financial Times yesterday. So as they're calling Kamala Harris, telling her, I don't care about diversity, equity, inclusion. I don't care whether you black or Indian. I don't care about the historic nature of your candidacy. Damn it. You ain't taxing my money. What are you? I'm 0.01% of the population, but I don't give a damn. I own all the rest of you Negroes. I'm about to show it. Hello, get off my taxes. Well, the international group that group belongs to, they iron Africa with such bated breath, the middle power competition in Africa. This is the op-ed page, unsigned, meaning it's the editorial board of the Financial Times. We're going to end with this. Last thing I must say. A jostle for influence brings opportunities, but also scope for bad decisions. Africa, it is right, is written here. Africa has rarely been at the top of the world's agenda. That's a lie. It's always been at the center. How are you defining that? But in spite of its lack of obvious economic or strategic clout, are you kidding? Everything you're doing, these damn computers we're looking on wouldn't exist if you didn't have the African continent. Many African nations are being courted by countries as varied as Turkey, Brazil, and Russia. The interest of such, quote, middle powers, end quote, reflected in sprouting Turkish embassies, swanky African summits, and high-profile visits. Article in today's New York Times about all the money Africa owes now. 40% of the money Nigeria owes 80% of the money that is owed in countries like Knubia and Angola are owed now to China. China is the one giving these loans. The International Money Fund, World Bank, the predators of the previous decades are receding because China, we love Africa. No, you love China, and you think you can say you love Africa in a way that will help you help Africa by helping yourself. And what ends up happening is loan defaults all over the continent. Ask anybody. Ask Ayafabara Anelli, whose mother's birthday is coming up, about to be 80 years old. Ask her how much it costs now in terms of Naira. What's the Naira to the dollar? The misery in Nigeria. 40% of foreign debt is owed to China. Numbers creeping up toward that in Ghana now. Going on in this article. As a Financial Times series has reported, all this week they've been reporting about this. This pick and mix world creates opportunities that, if cleverly exploited, could help countries break free of poverty. The picks of mix will be between governments and strategic partnership with private industry. Yeah, that will be like the people who own the diamond mines. Botswana just unearthed the second biggest diamond ever discovered. Company is Canadian. Congo, the strategic minerals. There's an Israeli investor who owns much of the strategic mineral market in Congo. Yeah, investors. As a Financial Times series has reported, this pick and mix world creates opportunities that, if cleverly exploited, could help countries break free of poverty. They could strike better deals on vital infrastructure projects or insist that commodity deals be accompanied by domestic processing of raw materials. Shout out to, I think it's Gabon. Gabon is saying we can make white cotton t-shirts and sell them to the world. The cotton we grow in Gabon shouldn't leave Gabon. It should go to the factory, to the t-shirt, and then we sell it to the world. You know who's nervous? Hanes and all them draws makers all over the world. You know who should be cheering that? All the young bros with the t-skirts, the white t-shirts to hit you just above the knee, standing on the corner in West Philly right now, in the Bronx, out there in LA. Yeah, everybody wear the t-skirts. Y'all should be cheering. But you're not cheering because you don't know. But now you know. If you didn't know, now you know, and you can think differently. Why? Because the people that sold you them 3 for $5 t-shirts is nervous now. Not the vendors who the people get wholesale from, but the wholesaler. Why? Because Gabon said, we grow the cotton over here. Why the hell are we sending it to Asia for processing? We can build a factory here. Continuing, it says, leaders need to accelerate the mostly theoretical African continental free trade area, which alone can transform fragmented economies into an attractive single market. I'm sure Adesoje and Baba Milton Alamadi will be talking about this on his Adesoje Speaks Knowledge channel. For many years, former colonial powers have struggled to engage productively with the continent. Translated, struggled to figure out how they're going to get their hooks deeper in African people. They took us, then they went back and tried to take all the damn materials, and now they try to figure out how they can get back in it. But guess what? You got 1 billion young people, half of them under the age of 25 in Africa, and they still having babies. So y'all can't figure it out. And wait till we relink. At that point, you're finished. Outside of few industries like oil and mining, like that small, Britain treated Africa largely as a recipient of aid administered through the now abolished Department of International Development. Yeah, Royal Dutch Shell. That's not of oil and mining. The hell you think? The French clung on more tenaciously, interfering in politics and business. They have paid the price. In recent years, anti-Francophone wave has swept across the Sahel. French troops have been ejected from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Yeah, Burkina Faso, they said, we're keeping all the minerals here. We're going to start making our own cars. We're going to have our own currency. We're going to link it to gold. Oh, this is a problem. You got a problem right now. Guess what? Now the French mad as hell. Oh, you don't know what to do you? Footnote, shout out to Patrick Tiafo. I think his people were colonized by the French, although he claims the United States. He's just won the U.S. Open last night. The Americans became, and Coco Golf, we got to cheer for Coco. The Americans became increasingly disengaged after the Cold War. Investors were dissuaded by distance and strict anti-bribery legislation. Why, you couldn't bribe people? Ha ha. Yeah. Washington viewed Africa almost exclusively through the prism of security. Whatever. Does that include strategic minerals? Don't be cute. Like that yellow cake uranium coming out of Mali. Yeah, like that dusty chalk vial that Colin Powell was shaking at the UN the week after UN conference against racism, or at least a couple of months after, when you want to invade Iraq, after you say you really going after Afghanistan. Yeah, don't act like we don't remember, Colin. That little chalk that you was shaking that you claimed was the yellow cake uranium traces, that stuff come from Mali. I guess that's strategic minerals. So I guess that would fall under security. The sentence again. Washington viewed Africa almost exclusively through the prism of security. There have been stuttering signs of U.S. re-engagement under President Joe Biden. Still, the relative decline of U.S. and European influence has created a vacuum that was filled initially by China, and in its wake, a host of middle powers, including India and the Gulf states. Africa offers resources and votes at the UN. Damn right it does. It wasn't just the Arab countries that said Zionism was racism. Go back and look at everybody who sided with the Zionism is racism resolution that kept Colin Powell out of South Africa to the joy of Condoleezza Rice. The African nations sided on that side too. You didn't own them then, and you don't own them now. We all come together, particularly if the Africans of the diaspora link with them. We continue as we wind to close of this article. It says, Africa promises, in the long run, Africa promises markets. See, this is the thing about trade. You only oppress people for so long before you got to sell them stuff. You want to sell your stuff in Africa too. The trick is everything you need to buy, the materials are in Africa. So while we send our stuff out, while we send our coltan, while we send our strategic minerals out, then you process them in China, sell the laptop to the world. And I got my iPhone I'm watching this on in South Africa or Nigeria with the materials, and it was come from Congo. We need to cut y'all out of this. And every leader that says they're going to do it, whether it be Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, Abdoulaye Wade in Senegal a few years ago, and now the new guy who won the election in Senegal threatening the same thing. Now you got to find bad governance. Now you got to have a coup d'etat. And if all that don't work, maybe you chop somebody up into a million pieces and drop their body in a vat of acid like they did Patrice Lumumba, as the CIA station chief in Congo wrote before he died in his book, Chief of Station CIA Congo. By 2050, there will be 2.5 billion Africans, half under 25, and they ain't counting none of us. As John Clark said, you count all of us, you in trouble. If they attain even a modest standard of living, that is a lot of consumers. Competition has also intensified for energy transition materials such as cobalt, lithium, manganese, and copper. It continues, because you always was stealing it. From Africa's perspective, new interest means options. Tanzania chose a Dubai-operated port. Ghana and Niger, a Turkish-built airport terminal. And the Central African Republic and Mali, Russian mercenaries. With choices come dangers. The history of exploitation by colonial powers is real, but European investments in Africa are subject to domestic scrutiny, entirely lacking in, say, China. Though Chinese investors have built valuable infrastructure, their logging companies and fishing fleets have been rapacious. They taking fish out the ocean by the tonnage out the coasts of Africa. Loading up on debt from China has also contributed to a wave of defaults from Zambia to Ethiopia. Too many investments have been white elephants. A $4 billion Chinese railway in Kenya has done more for political cronies than it has for economic productivity. They mad in Kenya. You talking about another tax increase? This is as Kenya has troops in Haiti. They just saw them out there battling one of the militias in Haiti. That was reported this week. The reason that they coming overseas because the United States trying to dig in to give them some money to do it. Ruto, you ain't hiding from nobody, Prime Minister of Kenya, but the people in Kenya are raising holy hell against you. Shouldn't they get more information and more support from all of us? Continuing finally says middle powers also bring fresh security entanglements. UAE meddling in Sudan's war is prolonging one of the world's worst humanitarian catastrophes. No question. Shout out to Macklemore. Say ain't going down there as long as y'all are interfering and creating this bad stuff going on. Wish more entertainers would do the same. Russian mercenaries who take payment in gold and diamonds offer nothing in terms of economic or social development. As protesters in Kenya have pointed out, I think it's 40% they owe the Chinese too in Kenya. African leaders too often act in their own interests, not in that of national development. Competition in Africa holds the prospect for more growth, more manufacturing, and more jobs. But if new patterns of engagement offer an opportunity, it is one that so far most African governments are squandering. Seeing beyond ourselves is the solution to the question you posed at the beginning, Prof. Whether it be Piney Woods or halfway around the world, if we come together, we can solve all of this because these money people don't have enough power to overwhelm us if we can form enough humanity to do it.
Ashe, hold that up again because I saw the paper. I saw middle passage.
Well, the middle powers, the middle power competition. Isn't it something? We be looking for ourselves. Middle powers, he means Turkey and India and them. Those
I understand, but I feel like it's the Middle Passage all over again, just in the form of resources, which we were 500 years ago.
Absolutely.
We were the cobalt and the uranium, and we were the cotton. We were, right?
You better put that bow on it. That is exactly right. You and I are the cobalt. That's exactly right. We're speaking English because we were they came and got us and shaped us into what that social structure needed. And here we are, thank Goddess and God, trying to fight our way out of it. Trying to fight our way out of it.
Speaking of that, I want to celebrate you for taking your health into your own hands. You look amazing. You sound amazing.
Thank you. I say, dropped 30 pounds so far. I'm gonna keep going for a little while.
I say this because Fat Man Scoop was on stage last night in Connecticut and collapsed and didn't make it.
What?
Yeah. You know, and we were talking, you know, Scarface, J. Anthony Brown. I was talking on Monday.
I heard you talking about Scarface. Yeah.
So many
you talked with him, right?
I talked with Jay. I haven't talked with Scarface recently, but you know, we need y'all here. And you know, it's and I just wanted you, if you could just spend a moment of just telling us what it took for you to start this journey, to lose the weight, to take your health into because you know it's so important.
Thank you. I'll say this quickly. I just well, I was never used to being heavy. So, and I was
all the pictures you were skinny.
I was always thin, very thin. And honestly, I think a great deal of it is stress. Eating late, you know, I don't really sleep a whole lot. And so, you know, you get to the point where, you know, usually going to Kemet, I'll lose some weight anyway. I'm very serious about, you know, I'm just not gonna eat a whole lot. Plus, when you travel overseas, you eat the wrong thing. Now you indoors for 2 days. So I'm like, I wasn't trying to, you know, so I eat little bread in the morning, but I started in May. I started walking, and then, you know, I was like, okay, I can see the changes. And then right at BlurCon, I accelerated it. You know, I'm like, okay, I can't keep rubbing on this stomach to make. So I was like, I need to.
Like, was a genie? I'm gonna make a
genie, right? You know, and then what you said a couple of weeks ago, Black August, you know, fast. Okay, I can do that. So, I mean, there was a time when I was, you know, maybe 30 years ago when I was hanging out tough. Shout out to Sister Callie and Brother Howard in Columbus, Ohio, who were faithful members of the Nation of Islam. You know, that's 1 meal a day. That's how to eat to live. People can say what they want about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, but what you're not going to say is them people don't know how to take care of their bodies and don't care how to eat to live. And so I just went back to Elijah Muhammad, bought the navy beans, you know, I started having 1 meal a day and, you know, and walk and exercise. And so that's, you know, yeah.
I just want, I mean, we shouldn't do it in private.
No, we should not.
Because so many people can gain inspiration, especially somebody like you, who is so committed to our liberation. And I'm glad that you're also now committed to living.
Yes.
And living is liberation. Our existence is a form of resistance. So
yes,
let's be more mindful. So watch that man collapse on stage.
Oh no.
And you know, and to know now that he's not here, but to be a Fat Man Scoop his whole life, as if that's a badge of honor. Talk about the Fat Boys or Heavy D and all, you know, all of the people that aren't here that we celebrate. Lizzo has also lost 50 pounds.
Has she?
Mm-hmm. And you know, all of this celebration of being heavy, that's one thing, but no one wants to shame anyone. But
no, hell no.
But there is a direct correlation between obesity and all of the poor health outcomes, from, you know, high blood pressure to diabetes to high cholesterol, all the things that lead to us not being here. If we can do anything as an act of resistance, living and being healthy and happy, that pokes a finger in the eye of all the people who are trying to oppress us. So joy is a form of liberation, and it is something to campaign on as well. But
I agree. It is a form of liberation. We have to be able to do it. And listen, thank you. I mean, you played a key role in this, because I have to say, in this season of back to school, that the stressors that I was under and have been under a lot of times at work, having a space, being in a space where we have community that is self-sustaining, self-sufficient, and self-determining has been the life-giving renewal that I think I speak for a lot of people here that we all need it. And thank you for doing that, because I know that energy feeds back into you as you fight your battles, and we got your front, back, and both sides.
No, I
just
feel
know
it.
that.
I feel it. I love you. I'm
I love you
about
too.
to head out myself. Dr. Carr, thank you. Everybody,
Travel
thank
safely,
you.
my dear.
Yes,
Yes.
I shall. All right, see y'all on Tuesday. Happy whatever, Labor Day is on
Yeah,
Monday.
is Cindy out doing? She doing maroons tomorrow, huh?
Yeah, she is. She's
Oh,
in.
good, because that maroon been marooning all week. I know she got to put it out with a bang.
Yes. So we got Monday. We're off though. So
very good.
I'll see y'all on Tuesday.
All right. See y'all later. Peace.
All right, bye-bye.